The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 1. A Boy with Nothing But Hope. The morning sun slowly climbed over the endless hills of Pine Creek, a forgotten little town hidden deep in the mountains of Montana. Most people had never heard of the place. There were no tall buildings, no shopping malls, and no busy highways. Just old wooden houses, dusty roads, and hard-working people who struggled every single day. Among them lived an 18-year-old boy named Ethan Carter. Ethan owned almost nothing. His clothes were faded from years of use. His shoes had been repaired so many times that even the stitches looked tired. His family lived inside a tiny cabin built by his grandfather decades ago. After Ethan's father passed away in a logging accident when Ethan was only 12, life became much harder. His mother, Sarah Carter, worked every job she could find. She cleaned houses, baked bread for neighbors, and sometimes spent entire nights sewing old clothes to earn a few extra dollars. Despite all the hardships, Sarah never allowed bitterness to enter their home. Every morning she smiled. Every evening she thanked God. And every night she reminded Ethan of one simple lesson. Your heart is worth more than your wallet. Those words stayed with him forever. Unlike many boys his age, Ethan never complained. He chopped firewood for elderly neighbors without asking for money. He repaired broken fences. He carried groceries for widows. He rescued lost animals. Some people even called him the Wonder Boy. Not because he had magic powers, but because strange things seemed to happen whenever Ethan helped someone. Broken friendships were repaired. Businesses suddenly improved. Lost pets somehow found their way home. Children stopped fighting. Even people who had lost hope somehow smiled again after talking to him. Nobody could explain it. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was kindness. Or maybe genuine goodness had its own kind of magic. One chilly afternoon, Ethan sat outside the cabin reading an old business book he had borrowed from the town library. The pages were yellow. Several corners were missing. But Ethan read every word as if he had discovered treasure. He dreamed of building something that could change lives, not just becoming rich. He wanted to create opportunities for people like his mother. People who worked hard but never seemed to get ahead. While he was reading, an old pickup truck stopped outside the cabin. It was driven by Mr. Benjamin Lewis, the town's oldest mechanic. Benjamin smiled. "Ethan, I need your help." Ethan immediately closed the book. "What happened?" "My grandson has been giving up on school. Nobody can convince him to keep studying." Ethan quietly walked to Benjamin's garage. Inside, 16-year-old Noah sat with his head down. "I'll never become anything," Noah whispered. "There aren't any opportunities here." Ethan sat beside him. "I used to believe the same thing." Noah looked up. "But then I realized something." "What?" "Sometimes opportunities don't come looking for us. We have to become the kind of person opportunities are looking for." The words were simple, but somehow they reached Noah's heart. For nearly 2 hours they talked about dreams, failures, fear, and courage. By sunset, Noah smiled for the first time in weeks. Benjamin watched quietly. "You have a gift, Ethan." Ethan laughed. "I just listen." "No," Benjamin replied softly. "You make people believe in themselves." That night, Ethan returned home. His mother had prepared a simple dinner. Homemade vegetable soup. Fresh bread. Nothing expensive. Yet somehow it tasted like the richest meal in the world. After dinner, Sarah noticed Ethan staring out the window. "What are you thinking about?" "I think my future is somewhere beyond these mountains." Sarah smiled gently. "I've known that for years." "You have." "A bird isn't born to stay inside its nest forever." The next morning, something unexpected happened. A white delivery van arrived in Pine Creek. The driver asked around town. "Does anyone know Ethan Carter?" Everyone pointed toward the little cabin. The driver handed Ethan a thick envelope. "There you go. No return address." The driver shook his head. "Nope." Inside the envelope was a train ticket. Destination: New York City. Along with it was a handwritten note. "The world needs people like you. Don't let this town become the end of your story. Your journey begins now." There was no signature. Only one mysterious symbol drawn at the bottom of the page. Ethan stared at it in silence. Someone out there knew who he was. But who? And why would a complete stranger send him a ticket to the biggest city in America? He had no idea. But deep inside, he felt that his life was about to change forever. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Leaving Home. Ethan barely slept that night. The mysterious train ticket lay on the small wooden table beside his bed. Every time he looked at it, it felt unreal. New York City. He had only seen it in books, documentaries, and old magazines from the town library. Skyscrapers, bright lights, millions of people, endless opportunities. It was a world completely different from Pine Creek. At sunrise, Ethan showed the envelope to his mother. Sarah read the note twice, then looked at her son with calm eyes. "Do you want to go?" Ethan hesitated. "I'm afraid." Sarah smiled. "Being afraid doesn't mean you shouldn't go. It means you're about to do something important." He looked around the little cabin. Every corner held a memory. The old rocking chair where his father used to sit. The handmade shelves filled with worn books. The window where he had watched countless sunsets. "This is home." "It always will be," Sarah replied. "But home isn't a place that keeps you from growing." The whole town gathered at the small train station the next morning. Mr. Benjamin Lewis handed Ethan a worn leather toolbox. You never know when fixing something might open a door. Mrs. Harper, the librarian, gave him 3 books. "Knowledge weighs nothing," she said. "Carry it everywhere." Little Noah hugged him tightly. "I'll finish school." Ethan smiled. "I know you will." As the train whistle echoed across the valley, Sarah embraced her son. "No matter how successful you become," she whispered, "never let success change your heart." "I promise." The train slowly pulled away. Ethan watched Pine Creek disappear beyond the mountains, carrying nothing but a backpack, a few books, the old toolbox, and dreams much bigger than his circumstances. He had no idea that somewhere in New York, fate was already preparing his first meeting with a young woman whose life would become deeply connected with his own. End of Chapter 2. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 3. The City That Never Waited. The train rolled into New York City just after sunrise. Ethan pressed his face against the window. Towering skyscrapers stretched into the clouds. Yellow taxis rushed through crowded streets. People hurried in every direction, barely looking at one another. Everything moved so fast. For a moment, Ethan wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. When the train doors opened, the noise hit him all at once. Car horns, sirens, voices, footsteps. The city seemed alive. Ethan stepped onto the platform with his old backpack over one shoulder and the leather toolbox in his hand. No one was waiting for him. No signs. No welcoming smile. Just thousands of strangers passing by. He reached into his pocket. After buying the train ticket years ago, whoever had sent it had also tucked $50 into the envelope. Ethan had used most of it on food during the trip. Now he had only $23 left. "Okay," he whispered to himself. "First, find work. Then find a place to sleep." For the next several hours, he walked from one business to another. A grocery store, a coffee shop, a construction site, a hardware store. Each answer sounded the same. Sorry, we're not hiring. Leave your resume. I don't have one, Ethan admitted. Then we can't help you. As the afternoon faded into evening, hunger began to replace hope. His stomach growled. His feet ached. Still, he refused to give up. While crossing a busy street, Ethan noticed an elderly man struggling to push a wheelchair. One of the wheels had broken. People walked past without stopping. Some glanced. Most didn't even notice. Ethan hurried over. "May I help?" The old man looked exhausted. "I've been trying for 30 minutes." Ethan knelt beside the wheelchair. He opened Benjamin's toolbox. Within minutes, he tightened a loose bolt, replaced a damaged pin using a spare piece of metal from the toolbox, and carefully adjusted the wheel. The wheelchair rolled smoothly again. The elderly man's eyes widened. "Young man, where did you learn that?" "My neighbor taught me." The man smiled warmly. "My name is Arthur Bennett." "I'm Ethan." Arthur reached into his wallet. "Please, take this." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't help for money." Arthur stared at him for a moment. "In this city," he said softly, "that's rare." Instead of forcing the money into Ethan's hand, Arthur handed him a business card. "If you ever need advice, come see me." The card simply read, Arthur Bennett, Bennett Community Foundation. Before Ethan could ask another question, a black car pulled up. Arthur waved goodbye and disappeared into traffic. Ethan slipped the card into his pocket. Maybe it would matter someday. Maybe not. Night arrived. Ethan finally found a cheap shelter where he could spend the night. It wasn't comfortable. The mattress was thin. The room was crowded. Someone snored loudly across the hall. But it had a roof. As he lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city outside, he remembered his mother's words. "Never let success change your heart." "I haven't even found success yet," he whispered with a small smile. "But I won't quit." The next morning, Ethan stood outside a small neighborhood diner. A handwritten sign hung in the window. "Help wanted." He took a deep breath and walked inside. The owner, a middle-aged woman named Maria Gonzalez, looked tired. "You have experience?" "No." "Can you cook?" "A little." "Can you wash dishes?" "Yes." "Can you work 12 hours?" "Yes." "Can you be honest?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Always." Maria studied his face for several seconds. Something about him reminded her of her own son, who had passed away years earlier. "You're hired." Ethan's face lit up. "When do I start?" She smiled. 5 minutes ago." For the first time since arriving in New York, Ethan felt that perhaps the city had finally opened a tiny door for him. He didn't know it yet, but someone was already watching him from across the street. A young woman wearing sunglasses sat inside a luxury black SUV. She had noticed how Ethan refused money from Arthur. She had seen the kindness in his eyes. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't stop thinking about the poor young man with the worn-out backpack. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Girl in the Black SUV. The black SUV remained parked across the street long after Ethan disappeared inside the diner. The young woman in the back seat lowered her sunglasses slightly. "Interesting," she murmured. Her name was Olivia Harrington. She was 21 years old and the only daughter of Richard Harrington, one of New York's most influential real estate developers. Olivia had grown up surrounded by luxury. Private schools, designer clothes, vacation homes, chauffeurs, bodyguards, everything money could buy. Yet she often felt that something was missing. People were always trying to impress her. Some wanted her family's money. Others wanted her father's influence. Very few cared about who she really was. That morning, She had watched Ethan help an elderly stranger without expecting anything in return. It was the first truly selfless act she had seen in a long time. Her driver interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Harrington, your father is waiting." She nodded. "Let's go." As the SUV drove away, Olivia glanced one last time at the small diner. She had no idea that their lives were about to cross in the most unexpected way. End of Chapter 4. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 5. A Chance Encounter. Ethan's first week at Maria's diner felt like a whirlwind. Every morning, he arrived before sunrise. He swept the floors, washed dishes, prepared vegetables, cleaned tables, and greeted customers with a warm smile. The work was exhausting. By the time the diner closed, his hands were sore, his back ached, and his feet felt like they had walked 100 miles. But Ethan never complained. Maria noticed. Most employees counted the minutes until their shift ended. Ethan looked for ways to make someone else's day a little better. If an elderly customer struggled to carry groceries, Ethan carried them to the car. If a child dropped an ice cream, he quietly bought another one with his own tip money. If someone looked lonely, Ethan took a moment to ask, "How's your day going?" Slowly, people began returning to the diner just to see him. One afternoon, a regular customer smiled at Maria. "I don't just come here for the burgers anymore." Maria laughed. "I know. The young man has something special." Business improved week after week. For the first time in months, every table was full during lunchtime. Maria couldn't explain it. Neither could Ethan. On Saturday morning, Maria handed Ethan a crisp $20 bill. "Take the afternoon off." "But we're busy." "I'll manage." "I'd rather help." Maria smiled. "That's exactly why you deserve a break." Ethan thanked her and wandered through Central Park. It was the first time he had truly explored New York. Children laughed as they chased pigeons. Street musicians filled the air with beautiful melodies. Artists painted portraits beneath the shade of old trees. For a few hours, the city's endless noise faded away. As Ethan sat on a park bench reading one of Mrs. Harper's books, a frightened scream echoed across the path. "Watch out!" A small golden retriever had slipped its leash and was racing toward a busy street. Without thinking, Ethan sprang to his feet. Cars sped past only a few yards away. The puppy froze in the middle of the road. A horn blared. People shouted. Ethan sprinted forward. Just seconds before an approaching taxi reached the dog, Ethan scooped it into his arms and rolled safely onto the sidewalk. The crowd gasped. The puppy licked Ethan's face as if thanking him. "You little troublemaker," Ethan laughed. Moments later, a young woman hurried toward him. She was wearing a simple white sweater, blue jeans, and a baseball cap. Unlike her usual appearance, there was nothing that hinted she came from one of the wealthiest families in America. "I'm so sorry," she said, breathing heavily. "Thank you for saving him." She gently took the puppy into her arms. "My name is Olivia." Ethan smiled. "I'm Ethan." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. There was something familiar about each other. Olivia recognized him immediately. He was the young man from the diner. But Ethan had never seen her before. "You work at Maria's diner, don't you?" Olivia asked. Ethan looked surprised. "Yes." "Have we met?" She smiled playfully. "Not exactly. I've seen you helping people." Ethan shrugged. "I just try to do what feels right." Most people would have proudly listed their good deeds. Ethan spoke as though they were nothing unusual. That caught Olivia's attention even more. "Can I buy you a coffee?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "I don't really let strangers spend money on me." Olivia laughed. "Then let's make it fair. You buy your coffee. I'll buy mine." and we simply have a conversation." Ethan smiled. "I think that's a good deal." They walked to a nearby cafe, talking about simple things: books, nature, small towns, dreams. Neither of them mentioned money. Neither of them mentioned social status. For the first time in years, Olivia felt she was talking to someone who wasn't trying to impress her. And Ethan simply believed he had met a kind stranger who loved dogs. As the afternoon turned into evening, Olivia glanced at her watch. "I should go." "It was nice meeting you," Ethan said. "You too." She paused for a moment. "Can we meet again sometime?" Ethan smiled. "I'd like that." As Olivia walked away with her puppy, she couldn't stop smiling. Her bodyguard, who had been watching discreetly from a distance, quietly spoke into his phone. "Mr. Harrington, your daughter has just spent 2 hours with an unknown young man." Silence filled the line. Then came a calm but firm reply. "Find out everything about him." Far across the park, Ethan watched Olivia disappear into the crowd. He had no idea who she really was. And he certainly had no idea that this simple afternoon was about to change the course of both their lives forever. End of Chapter 5. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 7. The First Test. The next morning began like any other. Ethan arrived at Maria's diner before 6 o'clock. He unlocked the front door, turned on the lights, and started preparing fresh coffee for the morning customers. The city outside was just beginning to wake up. Inside the diner, everything felt peaceful. Maria walked into the kitchen carrying a box of fresh vegetables. "Morning, Ethan." "Good morning, Maria. I've got a feeling today is going to be busy." Ethan smiled. "That's a good problem to have." An hour later, the diner was filled with customers. Office workers hurried in for breakfast. Taxi drivers chatted over pancakes. Families laughed together over stacks of waffles. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Suddenly, the front door opened. The conversations slowly faded. A tall man wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit stepped inside. Behind him were 2 men in black suits. Every movement they made was calm and deliberate. Maria quietly whispered, "They don't look like they're here for breakfast." The elegant man looked around the diner until his eyes met Ethan's. "You must be Ethan Carter." "Yes, sir. My name is Richard Harrington." Ethan politely extended his hand. "It's nice to meet you." Richard glanced at Ethan's hand for a brief moment before shaking it. His grip was firm. His smile wasn't. "I'd like to speak with you." Maria stepped forward. "He's working," Richard calmly replied. "I'll compensate you for his time." Maria frowned. "This isn't about money." Richard looked at her for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose it isn't." Ethan removed his apron. "I'll be back in a few minutes." Outside, a black luxury sedan waited by the curb. Richard opened the rear door. "Get in." Ethan hesitated only for a second before climbing inside. The car pulled away from the diner. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "Do you know who my daughter is?" Ethan looked confused. "Your daughter? Olivia?" Ethan's eyes widened. "You're her father?" "I am." A quiet silence settled between them. Richard studied Ethan carefully. "So, how much do you know about her?" "She's kind. She loves reading. She cares about animals. And she's one of the most genuine people I've met." Richard interrupted him. "I didn't ask for her personality. I asked what you know." Ethan answered honestly. "I don't know anything about her family's wealth. I never asked." Richard leaned back. "I believe you." That answer surprised Ethan. But it doesn't change anything. Richard reached into his briefcase and placed an envelope on the seat between them. I'd like you to stop seeing Olivia. Ethan looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. What's inside? A check. For $50,000. Ethan blinked. It was more money than he had ever imagined having. You can start a new life. Go anywhere. Do anything. Just stay away from my daughter. The car became completely silent. Richard waited. Most people would have grabbed the envelope immediately. Instead, Ethan gently pushed it back. I'm sorry. Richard stared at him. I can't accept that. You haven't even looked. I don't need to. Everyone has a price. Ethan quietly shook his head. My mother taught me something. Richard sighed impatiently. What? If someone offers you money to abandon what's right, the money usually costs more than it's worth. Richard's expression hardened. You think this is about love? I barely know Olivia. Then why refuse? Because you're asking me to treat a person like she's something that can be bought. Richard crossed his arms. You have courage. I'm just trying to have integrity. For the first time, Richard couldn't immediately respond. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals. He had persuaded politicians. He had outsmarted powerful competitors. But this young man, a dishwasher from a small town, had calmly rejected $50,000 without raising his voice. The sedan stopped outside the diner. Before Ethan stepped out, Richard spoke one last time. This city isn't kind to dreamers. Ethan smiled politely. Maybe. But kind people can still change it. Richard watched him walk back toward the diner. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt something unusual. Not admiration. Not yet. But doubt. Perhaps he had underestimated the young man. Across the street, Olivia had just arrived. She had seen Ethan getting out of her father's car. She hurried toward him. What happened? Ethan smiled. Your father wanted to meet me. Her face turned pale. What did he say? Ethan looked at the diner, then back at Olivia. He gave me my first real test. And I think I passed. Olivia smiled with relief. But neither of them noticed the man standing inside a nearby office building, watching everything through a pair of binoculars. He lowered them slowly and made a phone call. Sir, I've found him. The Wonder Boy has finally arrived in New York. A deep voice answered from the other end. Good. It's time for Phase 1. The call ended. The mysterious man smiled. Whatever had brought Ethan to New York? It was no accident. And the anonymous train ticket had been only the beginning. End of Chapter 7. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 8. The Man Behind the Ticket. The next morning, New York woke beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Rain tapped softly against the windows of Maria's diner as Ethan wiped down the tables before opening. Although he tried to focus on work, his thoughts kept returning to Richard Harrington. The meeting had been strange. Why would a billionaire personally offer a poor dishwasher $50,000? And who had sent the mysterious train ticket months earlier? The questions lingered in his mind. Around noon, Maria called him into her office. There's someone here to see you. Ethan looked surprised. For me? She nodded. He says his name is Arthur Bennett. Ethan immediately recognized the name. The elderly man whose wheelchair he had repaired on his first day in New York. Arthur entered with a gentle smile. It's good to see you again, Ethan. It's good to see you too, sir. Arthur looked around the busy diner. I see you've been working hard. I'm trying. Arthur noticed how every employee greeted Ethan with genuine respect. Customers smiled when they saw him. Even the cook in the kitchen waved cheerfully. Arthur quietly admired what he saw. Respect couldn't be bought. It had to be earned. "Would you mind taking a walk with me?" Arthur asked. Maria smiled. "Go ahead. You've earned a break." A few minutes later, they were walking through a quiet neighborhood lined with old brick buildings. Arthur finally spoke. "Tell me something. What made you help me that first day?" Ethan looked confused. "You needed help. That's all. Should there have been another reason?" Arthur laughed softly. "In this city, there usually is." They continued walking until they reached a small community center. Children were playing basketball outside. Inside, volunteers were serving lunch to elderly residents. Arthur smiled. "This foundation has been my life's work. I've spent 40 years helping families who have nowhere else to turn." Ethan looked around. "It's wonderful." Arthur sighed. "But we're struggling. Our building is old. Our donations are falling. And many people have stopped believing that kindness still exists." He turned toward Ethan. "I think you're exactly the kind of person we need." Ethan blinked. "Me? I'd like you to volunteer here whenever you have free time." "I can't pay you much. I don't expect much. I simply want these people to meet someone who reminds them that goodness is still alive." Without hesitation, Ethan smiled. "I'd love to help." Arthur nodded, pleased. "I knew you would." As they toured the building, Arthur stopped in front of an old photograph hanging on the wall. It showed a much younger Arthur standing beside another man. The second man wore round glasses and a weathered brown coat. He had kind eyes and an easy smile. Ethan stared at the photograph. "Who is he?" Arthur smiled sadly. "My oldest friend. His name was Samuel Brooks. He believed that the world could be changed by ordinary people with extraordinary hearts." "What happened to him?" "He disappeared almost 20 years ago. No one ever found out where he went." Arthur gently brushed the dust from the frame. "But before he vanished, he told me something." "What did he say?" "One day, a young man will arrive in this city carrying nothing but hope." Arthur laughed quietly. "I thought he was speaking in riddles." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Later that evening, Arthur handed Ethan a small, weathered wooden box. "I've kept this for many years. I think it belongs to you now." Ethan looked puzzled. "But why?" "Because Samuel left instructions. He said, 'When the right young man appears, give him this.'" Ethan carefully opened the box. Inside was an old silver compass. Its surface was scratched with age. Beneath it lay a folded piece of paper. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. Only one sentence was written in neat handwriting. "True north is never found on a map. It is found inside your character." There was no signature. Only the same mysterious symbol that had appeared on the train ticket. Ethan's heart began to race. "It can't be." Arthur looked surprised. "You've seen that symbol before?" Slowly, Ethan reached into his backpack. He removed the folded note that had arrived with the train ticket. Arthur compared the two symbols. They were identical. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Arthur whispered, "So, Samuel found you." At that very moment, several miles away, Richard Harrington stood in the conference room of Harrington Global Holdings. One of his executives entered with a file. "Sir, we've completed another investigation on Ethan Carter." Richard looked up. "And?" The executive hesitated. "Something doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" "We've searched school records. employment records, medical records, tax records, everything. And it almost looks like someone has been quietly opening doors for him. Richard frowned. What are you saying? I think someone has been watching Ethan long before he came to New York. Richard slowly closed the file. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just the story of a poor young man chasing a dream. Someone powerful had been preparing Ethan's path for years. But who? And why? Far across the city, Ethan stood beneath the evening sky, holding the old compass in one hand and the mysterious note in the other. The answers he had been searching for were getting closer. But so were the people determined to stop him. End of Chapter 8. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl Chapter 9. The Night That Changed Everything. 3 days passed. Every morning, Ethan worked at Maria's diner. Every evening, he volunteered at Arthur Bennett's community center. His days were long, but he never seemed to lose his energy. He taught children how to repair bicycles. He helped elderly residents carry groceries. He even organized a free reading hour every Friday night. Word began to spread through the neighborhood. Have you met the young man from Montana? He's always helping someone. He never asks for anything. Within weeks, the community center became busier than it had been in years. People who had stopped donating began returning. Volunteers who had left came back. Arthur watched it all with amazement. You really do have a gift, he told Ethan one evening. Ethan smiled. I don't think it's a gift. What is it, then? I think people just want someone to believe in them. Arthur nodded. That may be the rarest gift of all. Meanwhile, Olivia found herself spending more and more time with Ethan. Sometimes they walked through Central Park. Sometimes they browsed bookstores for hours. Sometimes they simply sat on a bench, watching the city rush past. They talked about everything. Dreams, childhood memories, books, music, life. One afternoon, Olivia asked a question she had been thinking about for days. Ethan, what do you want more than anything? He looked toward the skyline. When I was little, I thought I wanted money. And now I want to build something that gives people hope. She smiled. That's a different answer. My mother always said money should be a tool, not the destination. Olivia looked at him quietly. Most people she knew spoke about luxury cars, private islands, or expensive watches. Ethan spoke about changing lives. She admired that more than she could explain. That evening, Richard Harrington invited Olivia to dinner. The atmosphere was unusually quiet. Finally, Richard placed his fork on the table. I want you to stop seeing Ethan. Olivia looked directly into his eyes. No. Richard remained calm. You barely know him. I know enough. He's poor. So what? He has no connections. I don't care. He has no future. Olivia leaned forward. That's where you're wrong. Richard frowned. And how do you know? Because every person who spends time with him starts believing in themselves. Her father's expression hardened. You've become emotional. No. I've become observant. Without another word, Olivia stood up and left the dining room. Richard watched the door close. For the first time in years, his daughter had openly challenged him. Late that night, Ethan finished locking the community center. Arthur had already gone home. The streets were almost empty. As Ethan walked toward the subway station, he noticed smoke rising into the night sky. At first, he thought someone was burning trash. Then he heard shouting. Fire! People were running. A 3-story apartment building was engulfed in flames. Sirens echoed through the streets. Residents screamed from the sidewalks. My daughter! She's still inside. A desperate woman collapsed onto the pavement. The firefighters can't reach the third floor. Ethan looked up. Through a smoke-filled window, he could barely make out the silhouette of a little girl crying for help. Without thinking, he threw off his backpack. A firefighter grabbed his arm. "Don't! It's too dangerous." Ethan looked at the terrified mother, then back at the burning building. "If that were your child, would you wait?" Before anyone could stop him, Ethan rushed inside. The crowd gasped. Flames crackled along the staircase. Smoke filled every hallway. He covered his mouth with his jacket and climbed toward the third floor. The heat was unbearable. Wood splintered beneath his feet. He could hear the little girl crying. "I'm here," he shouted. "Keep talking." "In here," came the frightened voice. Ethan kicked open the bedroom door. A little girl, no older than 7, sat huddled beside her bed. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm going to get you home." She threw her arms around him. Just as Ethan picked her up, a loud crack echoed through the room. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind them. The only hallway leading to the stairs was now blocked by fire. Outside, firefighters stared in disbelief. One of them shouted, "They're trapped." The crowd fell silent. Among them stood Olivia. She had been driving home when she saw the smoke. Now she watched helplessly as flames surrounded the third floor. Tears filled her eyes. "Ethan." She whispered his name over and over. Inside the burning apartment, Ethan looked around desperately. There had to be another way out. But the fire was closing in from every direction. The little girl clung tightly to him. "I'm scared." Ethan held her close. "So am I. But I promise, I'm not leaving without you." As another section of the ceiling crashed to the floor, the room shook violently. Outside, everyone held their breath. Would the Wonder Boy survive? Or had his kindness finally led him into a battle he couldn't win? End of Chapter 9. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 10. Through the Fire. The thick smoke made it almost impossible to breathe. Ethan wrapped his jacket around the little girl's face. "Stay close to me." She nodded, her small hands trembling. "My name is Lily," she whispered. "I'm Ethan." He forced a reassuring smile. "And we're getting out of here together." Outside, firefighters worked frantically. "The third floor is collapsing." "We need another ladder." "It's too high." The fire chief clenched his fists. "There isn't enough time." Olivia stood behind the safety line, unable to take her eyes off the burning building. "Please," she whispered. "Please let him be okay." Inside the apartment, Ethan searched every room. The hallway was completely blocked. The staircase had collapsed. The windows overlooked a narrow alley. He carefully opened one. Fresh air rushed inside. But when he looked down, his heart sank. 3 stories. Too far to jump. Then he noticed something. A faded metal fire escape hung just outside the neighboring apartment. The problem was that part of it had broken away years ago. There was a gap of nearly 6 feet between the window and the fire escape. Lily looked at him. "Can we make it?" Ethan took a deep breath. "We're going to try." He tied a curtain around Lily's waist, securing her tightly against his back. "Hold on to me. I won't let go." He climbed onto the narrow window ledge. The wind pushed smoke into his face. Below, hundreds of people watched in horror. A firefighter looked up. "There they are." The crowd erupted into shouts. Olivia looked toward the third-floor window. She could barely make out Ethan's silhouette through the smoke. Her heart pounded. Richard Harrington had also arrived after hearing about the fire. Standing beside his security team, he silently watched the young man. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about money. He wasn't thinking about social status. He was simply watching someone risk his life for a child he had never met. Ethan measured the distance. One chance. If he missed, there would be no second attempt. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Fear is natural. Let courage decide what happens next. He opened his eyes. Ready, Lily? I'm ready. Ethan pushed off the window with every ounce of strength he had. For a terrifying second, they were suspended in the air. Then, his hands slammed against the rusted fire escape. The impact nearly tore his fingers loose. The metal groaned. One hand slipped. Lily screamed. Below, the crowd gasped. With a desperate effort, Ethan grabbed the railing with his other hand and pulled them both onto the platform. Cheers erupted from the street. The firefighters quickly positioned a ladder against the fire escape. Step by step, Ethan carried Lily downward. As his feet touched the ground, the exhausted mother ran toward them. My baby! Lily leaped into her mother's arms. I'm okay, Mommy. The woman turned to Ethan, tears streaming down her face. You saved my daughter. Ethan smiled weakly. I'm glad she's safe. Before anyone could say another word, his knees buckled. The smoke had taken its toll. He collapsed onto the pavement. The next thing Ethan remembered was the sound of a heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. He slowly opened his eyes. The room was bright. A nurse noticed he was awake. Welcome back. What happened? You inhaled a lot of smoke. You've been unconscious for several hours. Ethan tried to sit up. The nurse gently stopped him. Easy. The doctor says you'll recover. A soft knock came at the door. Maria entered first. You scared us half to death. Arthur followed behind her. Then Olivia walked in. The moment their eyes met, she rushed to his bedside. Without saying a word, she hugged him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. You idiot, she whispered. You could have died. Ethan smiled faintly. But Lily didn't. Olivia laughed through her tears. That's exactly why you're impossible. Arthur shook his head with admiration. In 70 years, I've met businessmen, politicians, judges, heroes, but I've never met anyone quite like you. Late that evening, another visitor arrived. Richard Harrington. Everyone else quietly left the room. Richard stood beside Ethan's bed for several moments. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. I watched everything. Ethan looked at him. You shouldn't have gone in. I know. You could have died. I know. Richard sighed. Most people spend their lives protecting what belongs to them. You risked yours for a complete stranger. Ethan smiled. She wasn't a stranger. Richard looked confused. What do you mean? For her mother. She was the whole world. Richard lowered his eyes. Those words stayed with him. For the first time, he wasn't looking at Ethan as a poor young man. He was looking at someone whose character couldn't be measured by wealth. As Richard turned to leave, he paused at the door. Without looking back, he quietly said, I still don't approve of you. But today you earned my respect. The door closed behind him. Ethan smiled to himself. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was the first crack in the wall Richard Harrington had built around his heart. Outside the hospital, however, another pair of eyes watched from a parked black sedan. The mysterious man from before lowered a camera after taking several photographs of Ethan's room. He dialed a number. Phase 1 is complete. A deep voice answered. And Phase 2. The man looked toward the hospital entrance. Now. We introduce him to his greatest opportunity." The line went silent. Somewhere in New York, a carefully planned future was beginning to unfold, and Ethan had no idea that the biggest test of his life was still ahead. End of Chapter 10. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 11. An Unexpected Opportunity. Ethan was discharged from the hospital 3 days later. The doctors told him to rest for at least a week. Maria had a different opinion. "You are not coming back to work tomorrow," she said firmly. "But I feel much better." "I don't care how you feel." She folded her arms. "You almost lost your life. Your job will still be here next week." Arthur smiled. "For once, I agree with Maria." Ethan laughed. "It seems I don't have much of a choice." "You certainly don't," Maria replied. The story of the apartment fire quickly spread across New York. Local newspapers called him the young hero from Montana. Television stations replayed the rescue footage over and over again. Social media was filled with videos of Ethan carrying little Lily down the fire escape. People admired his courage. But Ethan tried to avoid the attention. "It wasn't about me," he told every reporter. "It was about saving a child." His humility only made people admire him even more. One quiet afternoon, Ethan was sitting on a bench in Central Park, reading a book, when a familiar black sedan stopped nearby. The driver stepped out. "Mr. Carter." "Yes." "Mr. Arthur Bennett would like you to join him." A few minutes later, Ethan arrived at Arthur's office. Arthur wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was a woman in her early 50s with silver hair, a navy blue suit, and sharp, intelligent eyes. Arthur stood. "Ethan, I'd like you to meet Victoria Reynolds." Victoria smiled and extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Ethan shook her hand politely. "I'm pleased to meet you too." Arthur motioned for everyone to sit. Victoria is the CEO of Reynolds Innovation Group, one of the fastest-growing technology consulting companies in New York. Ethan looked surprised. Victoria smiled. "I've heard a lot about you. I'm afraid you've heard more than I deserve." She laughed. "That's exactly the kind of answer I expected." Victoria placed a folder on the table. "I've watched every interview you've given. I've spoken with Maria. I've spoken with Arthur. I even spoke with the firefighters who were at the apartment building." Ethan looked embarrassed. "Why?" "Because I'm looking for people with character." She leaned forward. "I can teach someone business. I can teach leadership. I can teach management. But I can't teach integrity." She slid the folder toward him. "I'd like to offer you a position in our leadership development program." Ethan opened the folder. His eyes widened. The salary was nearly 5 times what he earned at the diner. There was also housing assistance, paid education, and professional training. I don't know what to say." Victoria smiled. "Say yes." Ethan looked at Arthur. Arthur simply nodded. This opportunity won't come twice. That evening, Ethan visited Maria. She was wiping down the counter after closing. "I got a job offer." Maria looked up. "I know. You know. Victoria called me this morning." Ethan looked worried. "If I accept, I'll have to leave the diner." Maria smiled warmly. "Ethan, this diner was never meant to be your destination. It was your beginning." She reached into the kitchen and returned with his old blue apron. "You've served enough coffee. It's time to serve your dreams." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I'll never forget what you've done for me." Maria hugged him. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" "When you become successful, don't forget people who are still washing dishes." I promise. The following Monday, Ethan walked into the impressive glass headquarters of Reynolds Innovation Group. The lobby alone was larger than his entire hometown library. Employees in business suits hurried past. Massive digital screens displayed projects from around the world. Everything felt unfamiliar. A receptionist smiled. "Welcome, Mr. Carter." Someone already knew his name. He took a deep breath. This is really happening. As he stepped into the elevator, another elevator opened across the lobby. Richard Harrington walked out with several executives. He stopped in his tracks when he saw Ethan. "You." Ethan smiled politely. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington." Richard looked toward Victoria Reynolds, who had just joined Ethan. "You hired him." Victoria smiled confidently. "I hired the most promising young leader I've seen in years." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Based on what?" "Not his resume. Not his education. His character." Richard was silent. Victoria continued. "In my experience, skills create employees. But character creates leaders." Richard glanced at Ethan one more time before entering the boardroom. He didn't say another word. But something about Victoria's confidence unsettled him. She wasn't known for making risky decisions. If she believed Ethan was special, perhaps there was more to the young man than anyone had realized. Later that evening, Ethan stayed behind after orientation. As he walked through the nearly empty office, he noticed an old framed photograph hanging near the executive floor. His footsteps slowed. His heart skipped a beat. The photograph showed Victoria Reynolds, Arthur Bennett, and the same mysterious man from the old picture in Arthur's community center, Samuel Brooks, the man who had disappeared 20 years ago. Beneath the frame was a small engraved plaque. "Vision begins with one person who believes in another." Ethan stared at Samuel's face. The same kind eyes, the same calm smile, the same mysterious symbol engraved in the corner of the plaque. Someone had been guiding his journey for years. But why? And where was Samuel Brooks now? As Ethan reached out to touch the frame, he didn't notice a hidden security camera slowly zooming in on him. Far away, in an undisclosed location, an older man watched the live camera feed on a monitor. His silver hair framed a weathered but gentle face. He smiled softly. "So you've finally arrived." "It won't be long now, Ethan." The screen went dark. End of Chapter 11. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl Chapter 12. The Impossible Challenge. Ethan's first day at Reynolds Innovation Group began at exactly 8 o'clock. The training room overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the room with sunlight. Around him sat 19 other trainees. Most were graduates from prestigious universities. Some had MBAs. Others had years of experience at Fortune 500 companies. As Ethan introduced himself, he noticed a few curious looks. One trainee whispered to another, "Isn't he the guy from the news? The firefighter hero?" "No," another replied quietly. "I heard he used to wash dishes." A few people smiled politely. Others weren't impressed. One young man in an expensive suit leaned back in his chair. His name was Daniel Brooks. He came from a wealthy family and had graduated at the top of his business school class. "So," Daniel said with a smirk, "you're the famous hero." Ethan smiled. "I don't know about famous. I just did what anyone should do." Daniel chuckled. "I doubt anyone here has ever jumped into a burning building." Several trainees laughed. Daniel continued, "But bravery isn't business." Ethan nodded. "You're right. Then why are you here?" "To learn." Daniel expected an argument. Instead, he received a calm answer. For some reason, that irritated him even more. At 9 o'clock sharp, Victoria Reynolds entered the room. "Good morning, everyone." The conversation stopped immediately. She stood before the class with a small wooden box in her hands. "I've spent 30 years hiring talented people." She looked around the room. "But today, I want to find something more important than talent." She placed the box on the table. "This program won't be easy. Over the next 6 months, only one trainee will become my executive apprentice." The room became silent. Everyone knew what that meant. It was one of the most sought-after positions in the company. Victoria smiled. "And your first challenge begins now." She opened the wooden box. Inside were 20 envelopes. Each trainee received one. Ethan opened his. Inside was a single card. Project Hope. There were no other instructions. The trainees exchanged confused glances. Daniel raised his hand. "Excuse me, Ms. Reynolds." "Yes." "What exactly are we supposed to do?" Victoria smiled. "If I tell you, it wouldn't be a leadership challenge." She looked around the room. "You have 30 days. Good luck." Then she walked out. The room exploded with conversation. "This doesn't make any sense. There aren't any rules. How are we supposed to know what's expected?" Everyone began forming groups. Everyone except Ethan. He quietly slipped the card back into its envelope. Daniel noticed. "You're not asking questions." Ethan shook his head. "No. You aren't even curious." "I am. So why not ask?" Ethan smiled. "Sometimes the best way to understand a problem is to observe it before trying to solve it." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Good luck with that." That afternoon, Ethan visited Arthur Bennett. He showed him the envelope. Arthur smiled the moment he saw the words Project Hope. "You've heard of this?" Arthur nodded. "Many years ago." "What is it?" "I can't tell you." "Why not?" "Because discovering the answer is part of the test." Ethan laughed. "Everyone keeps saying that." Arthur smiled knowingly. "But I can give you one piece of advice." "What is it?" Arthur looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "Don't chase success. Chase impact." On his way home, Ethan walked through the same neighborhood where Arthur's community center stood. A small crowd had gathered outside an abandoned building. Curious, he walked closer. The old building had once been a youth center. Now its windows were broken. Graffiti covered the walls. Children kicked a worn-out soccer ball in the parking lot because they had nowhere else to play. An elderly woman sighed. "This place used to be full of life. What happened? No one cared enough to save it." Ethan looked at the faded sign above the entrance. "Hope Community Center." His eyes widened. "Hope." He slowly reached into his pocket and looked at the card again. Project Hope. Could it really be that simple? Or was it only a coincidence? That evening, Olivia met Ethan for dinner at a small family-owned restaurant. "So, how was your first day?" "It was interesting." He explained the mysterious challenge. Olivia listened carefully. When he finished, she smiled. "What are you thinking?" "I think the project isn't about business." "What makes you say that?" "Businesses solve problems, but leaders solve people's problems first." Olivia smiled. "I've noticed something about you." "What?" "You always look for people before you look for profits." Ethan laughed softly. "My mother would be happy to hear that." Across the city, Richard Harrington sat in his office reviewing reports. His assistant entered. "Sir." "What is it?" "Reynolds Innovation Group has officially enrolled Ethan Carter in Project Hope." Richard's expression changed. Project Hope. Yes. He slowly stood and walked toward the window. I thought Victoria had discontinued that program years ago. So did everyone else. Richard became unusually quiet. After a long silence, he spoke. Find out everything. I want every document we have on Project Hope. The assistant nodded. Immediately. As the door closed, Richard whispered to himself, if Victoria has chosen Ethan, then Samuel's old plan may still be alive. For the first time, Richard wasn't investigating Ethan because of Olivia. He was investigating him because of something much older. Something he had hoped would remain buried forever. End of Chapter 12. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 13. Building Hope. Monday morning arrived with a cool autumn breeze. Instead of rushing to his office after training, Ethan took the subway straight to the abandoned Hope Community Center. The building looked even worse in daylight. Broken windows, peeling paint, rusted basketball hoops, weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. A faded mural on one wall showed children holding hands beneath the words, "Hope begins here." Ethan stood quietly for several minutes. He could almost imagine the laughter that had once filled the place. An elderly janitor sweeping the sidewalk noticed him. "You thinking about buying it?" the man joked. Ethan smiled. "I don't have enough money to buy lunch." The old man laughed. "I like your honesty. My name's Frank." "I'm Ethan." Frank leaned on his broom. "This place has been empty for almost 12 years. What happened?" "The city cut funding. People moved away. Eventually, everyone forgot about it." He looked at the building with sadness. But the neighborhood never stopped needing it. That evening, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the center. Instead of going home, he visited Arthur Bennett. What if Project Hope is about restoring this place? Arthur smiled but gave no direct answer. "What do you think?" "I think a community doesn't need another luxury apartment. It needs somewhere children can dream." Arthur's eyes sparkled. "Interesting. But restoring that building would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." "I know. And you don't have that kind of money." "I know. So what's your plan?" Ethan smiled. "I'll start with what I do have." "And what's that?" "My time." The next Saturday morning, Ethan returned to the abandoned center carrying a bucket, a mop, work gloves, and Benjamin Lewis's old toolbox from Montana. Frank looked surprised. "You came back." "I said I would." "By yourself." "For now." Ethan unlocked the side gate with permission from the city maintenance office and began cleaning. He picked up broken glass, removed weeds, swept years of dust from the front entrance. 4 hours, he worked alone. Passers-by watched curiously. Some smiled. Most kept walking. Around noon, a familiar voice called out, "Need some help?" Ethan turned. Olivia stood there wearing jeans, sneakers, and gardening gloves. She held 2 large trash bags. He laughed. "I don't think those gloves match your designer handbag." She looked down. "Oh." She handed the expensive handbag to her driver. "Better." "Much." They spent the afternoon cleaning side by side. They laughed as dust covered their clothes. They painted over graffiti. They cleared old flower beds. Neither of them noticed a teenager recording everything on his phone. By sunset, something unexpected happened. A little boy carrying a soccer ball walked up to Ethan. "Mister, can I help?" "Of course." 5 minutes later, the boy's older sister joined. Then their mother. Then a retired carpenter. Then 2 college students. Within an hour, nearly 20 volunteers were working together. No one had been invited. No one had been paid. People had simply seen someone care, and decided to care too. Frank watched from the sidewalk with tears in his eyes. I haven't seen this neighborhood come together like this in years. Arthur, standing quietly across the street, smiled to himself. He whispered, "Leadership." The following Monday, Victoria Reynolds visited the site without telling Ethan. She stood at the corner, unnoticed. One of her senior executives asked, "Shouldn't we tell him you're here?" Victoria shook her head. "No, I don't want him performing for an audience." She watched Ethan helping a young volunteer learn how to paint a wall. When the boy accidentally spilled paint on Ethan's shirt, Ethan laughed instead of getting angry. "No problem. Mistakes are easier to clean than regrets." The boy smiled with relief. Victoria quietly made a note in her journal. "He teaches without realizing he's teaching." Not everyone admired Ethan's project. Back at Reynolds Innovation Group, Daniel Brooks sat in the cafeteria scrolling through social media. A local news page had posted photos of the cleanup. Young volunteers bring hope back to an abandoned community center. At the center of every picture was Ethan. Daniel frowned. "So that's your strategy." He turned to another trainee. "He's using charity to impress Victoria." The trainee shrugged. "Maybe he's just helping." Daniel shook his head. "No one is that good." That evening, Daniel hired a private investigator. "I need everything on Ethan Carter." The investigator nodded. "Family, friends, financial records, anything unusual." Daniel smiled coldly. "Everyone has a weakness. I just need to find his." Meanwhile, Richard Harrington sat alone in his office, reading an old leather-bound journal that had been locked in his safe for nearly 20 years. On the first page was a photograph of 4 young friends standing shoulder to shoulder. Samuel Brooks, Arthur Bennett, Victoria Reynolds, Richard Harrington. They were smiling. They looked inseparable. Richard gently touched Samuel's face in the photograph. "So, you really found him?" He closed the journal and stared out the window. "I hope you're wrong, Samuel, because if Ethan is who you believed he could become, everything we built may have to change." Across town, Ethan locked the gates of the community center after another successful day of volunteering. He looked at the freshly painted entrance. For the first time in years, the words above the door were visible again. "Hope begins here." He smiled. He still didn't know whether this was the correct answer to project hope. But deep inside, it felt like the right thing to do. And for Ethan Carter, doing the right thing had always been the beginning of every great journey. End of Chapter 13. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 14. The boy everyone started talking about. By the end of October, the Old Hope Community Center looked completely different. The broken windows had been replaced. The walls were freshly painted. The playground had been cleaned. Flowers now lined the entrance where weeds had once grown. Every Saturday, more volunteers arrived. Some brought paint. Others donated books. A local bakery delivered fresh bread for everyone working at the site. No one was asked to help. They came because they wanted to. And somehow, Ethan inspired that feeling wherever he went. One Saturday morning, a television news van pulled up outside the center. A young reporter stepped out with a cameraman. She introduced herself to Frank. "We're covering community projects across New York." "Who organized all of this?" Frank smiled and pointed toward Ethan. "That young man." The reporter walked over. "Excuse me. I'm Jessica from Channel 8 News. We'd love to interview you." Ethan looked uncomfortable. "I'm probably not the right person." Jessica laughed. "You're standing in the middle of a project everyone in the neighborhood is talking about. It wasn't just me. He pointed around him. Look at them. The carpenter who rebuilt the playground. The retired teacher organizing free reading classes. The teenagers planting flowers. They're the story. Jessica smiled. You always do that. Do what? Shift the spotlight away from yourself. Ethan shrugged. The spotlight belongs to the people doing the work. The cameraman quietly whispered to Jessica. He's different. She nodded. I know. That evening, the story aired on local television. The headline read, "One young man brings a forgotten neighborhood back to life." The report didn't focus on Ethan's rescue from the apartment fire. Instead, it showed children laughing in the newly restored playground, parents reading with their kids, volunteers sharing meals after long days of work. At the end of the report, Jessica asked Ethan one final question. If someone gave you $1 million today, what would you do? Ethan thought for a moment. I'd ask a different question. Jessica smiled. What question? How many lives can $1 million improve? The interview ended. Within hours, millions of people had watched it online. On Monday morning, everyone at Reynolds Innovation Group was talking about Ethan. Some employees applauded as he entered the lobby. Others shook his hand. Daniel watched from across the room. His frustration grew stronger. This is ridiculous. One trainee smiled. He's becoming the face of the company. Daniel replied sharply. He hasn't even finished the training program. The trainee shrugged. Maybe that's because he's earning people's respect. Daniel clenched his jaw. Respect. That was the one thing he couldn't buy. Later that afternoon, Victoria called Ethan into her office. He knocked gently. You wanted to see me? Victoria smiled. Come in. She pointed toward a chair. I watched your interview. I'm sorry if I said anything wrong. She laughed. You said exactly the right things. She handed him a folder. I've made a decision. Ethan opened it. Inside was an invitation to represent Reynolds Innovation Group at the New York Young Leaders Summit, one of the city's most prestigious leadership events. Speakers from major companies, universities, and non-profit organizations would attend. I've never spoken at an event like that. Victoria smiled. I know. That's why you're going. That evening, Olivia met Ethan at a quiet cafe. When she heard the news, her face lit up. That's incredible. I don't know if I'm ready. She leaned forward. Do you remember what you told Noah back in Montana? Ethan looked surprised. I never told you about Noah. Olivia smiled. Arthur did. She continued. You told him that opportunities don't look for perfect people. They look for prepared people. Ethan laughed. I guess I need to follow my own advice. Across town, Richard Harrington sat in a board meeting with several executives. One executive spoke first. Sir, the City Council has invited Ethan Carter to speak at the Young Leaders Summit. Another executive added, the mayor is expected to attend. Richard remained silent. Then his assistant entered quietly and handed him another report. Sir, the investigation you requested is complete. Richard opened the file. Most of it contained ordinary information. Work history, volunteer activities, references. Then he reached the final page. His eyes froze. Attached was an old photograph taken nearly 20 years earlier. A much younger Samuel Brooks stood beside a little boy of about 6 years old. The boy was smiling while holding a wooden compass. Richard's breathing slowed. He looked closer. The little boy's face was unmistakable. It was Ethan. Richard whispered to himself. So Samuel knew him. All those years ago. He closed the file and looked out the window. This changes everything. That same night, Ethan returned to his small apartment after another long day. As he unlocked the door, he noticed a neatly wrapped package waiting outside. There was no return address. Only his name written in elegant handwriting. Inside the package was a brand new navy blue suit, perfectly tailored to his size. Folded neatly beside it was another handwritten note. A leader should never be judged by his clothes. But sometimes clothes open doors that character keeps open. At the bottom of the note, the same mysterious symbol. Ethan smiled. "Who are you, Samuel Brooks?" He looked out the window toward the glittering lights of New York. Somewhere in this city, the man who had quietly guided his life still seemed to be watching. And Ethan had a feeling that they were closer to meeting than ever before. End of chapter 14. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 15. A speech that no one expected. The morning of the New York Young Leaders Summit arrived with crisp autumn air and clear blue skies. The event was being held at the historic Grand Manhattan Convention Center. Hundreds of guests filled the building. Business leaders, university professors, non-profit founders, journalists, government officials, and dozens of ambitious young entrepreneurs hoping to make a name for themselves. Ethan stood backstage, adjusting the navy blue suit that had mysteriously appeared outside his apartment. It fit perfectly. Olivia smiled as she straightened his tie. "You clean up pretty well." Ethan laughed nervously. "I still feel more comfortable in my old work boots." She smiled. "That's exactly why people trust you." Arthur Bennett joined them. He placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Don't try to impress anyone. Just tell the truth." Victoria Reynolds nodded. People remember honesty far longer than perfect speeches. Ethan took a deep breath. "I'll do my best." The auditorium lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is someone whose story has inspired thousands across New York. He arrived in this city with almost nothing. He became known for saving a child from a burning apartment. And today, he reminds us that leadership begins with service. Please welcome Mr. Ethan Carter." The audience applauded as Ethan walked onto the stage. The bright lights made it difficult to see the crowd, but he could make out a few familiar faces. Maria, Arthur, Victoria, Olivia, and, sitting quietly in the front row, Richard Harrington. Ethan reached the podium. For several seconds, he simply looked at the audience. The room became completely silent. He smiled. "Good morning." His voice was calm. "When I was a little boy in Montana, my mother used to tell me something. If you want to know the value of a person, watch how they treat someone who can do nothing for them." The audience listened carefully. "I didn't grow up with money. I didn't grow up with influence. I grew up believing that kindness was something everyone could afford." A few people nodded. "I used to think success meant having more. But after meeting so many wonderful people, I've realized success is actually about giving more." The audience remained silent, not because they were bored, because every word felt genuine. He stepped away from the podium. "When I came to New York, I was looking for a job. What I found were people. Maria gave me my first opportunity. Arthur reminded me that communities matter. Victoria believed in me before I believed in myself." He paused. "And someone I still haven't met believed in me long before I ever came here." His thoughts briefly drifted to Samuel Brooks, the mysterious man who had quietly shaped his journey. "I've learned something. Buildings don't change cities. People do. Money doesn't create trust. Character does. And hope always begins with one person deciding not to walk away. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then someone stood and applauded. It was an elderly teacher in the third row. Another person stood. Then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium rose to its feet. A standing ovation echoed through the hall. Some people wiped away tears. Others simply smiled. Richard Harrington remained seated for a few moments. Then, slowly, he stood as well. His applause was quiet, but it was sincere. After the event ended, dozens of people gathered around Ethan. Students wanted photographs. Journalists requested interviews. Business owners handed him business cards. One elderly veteran shook Ethan's hand. "I've attended conferences for 40 years. I've never heard a speech that felt more honest." Ethan smiled. "Thank you." As the crowd began to thin, a distinguished older gentleman approached him. He wore a charcoal gray overcoat and carried an elegant walking cane. His silver hair was neatly combed. His eyes were calm and thoughtful. "I enjoyed your speech." "Thank you, sir. My name is—" The man paused for a moment. "Michael Brooks." Ethan's heart skipped. "Brooks." The man smiled. "Yes. I was an old friend of Samuel Brooks." Ethan stared at him. "You knew Samuel?" "For most of my life. I've been looking for him." Michael's expression softened. "So have I." Before Ethan could ask another question, Michael reached into his coat pocket and handed him a small, worn envelope. "Samuel asked me to give you this. Only after you earned your first standing ovation." Ethan looked at the envelope in disbelief. How could he have known? Michael smiled gently. Samuel always believed that true leaders would reveal themselves. He wasn't interested in finding the smartest young man. He was waiting for the kindest one. Without another word, Michael tipped his hat and walked away into the crowd. Ethan hurried after him. "Wait." But by the time he reached the hallway, Michael Brooks had disappeared. That evening, Ethan returned to his apartment. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, "Ethan, if you are reading this, then you have begun to understand that leadership is not about being followed. It is about helping others discover the leader within themselves. You are closer to me than you realize. But before we meet, you must face one final lesson. Power without humility destroys everything it touches. When the time comes, choose people over pride. I will be waiting. Samuel Brooks." At the bottom of the page was something Ethan had never seen before. An address. No explanation. No instructions. Just a location on the outskirts of New York. He looked at the address for a long time. Could this finally be the place where he would meet the mysterious man who had changed his life? Outside his apartment window, rain began to fall softly over the city. Somewhere beyond those lights, Samuel Brooks was waiting. But Ethan had no idea that someone else had also seen the address. Standing in the shadows across the street, Daniel Brooks lowered a high-powered camera. He smiled to himself. "So, now I know where you're going." He started his car. "If I can't beat you, I'll get there first." End of chapter 15. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl, Chapter 16. The Cabin in the Woods. The rain continued through the night. Ethan barely slept. Samuel Brooks' letter lay on the small table beside his bed. He had read it so many times that he almost knew every word by heart. Choose people over pride. Those words stayed with him. Who was Samuel? Why had he spent years guiding a poor boy from Montana? And why had he waited until now to reveal an address? At sunrise, Ethan folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his backpack. He called Arthur Bennett. "I think I found him." Arthur was silent for several seconds. "You found Samuel?" "I found an address." Arthur's voice became unusually serious. "Don't go alone." 2 hours later, Ethan, Arthur, and Olivia were driving north of New York City. The skyscrapers slowly disappeared. Busy highways became narrow country roads. Dense forests surrounded them. Finally, the GPS announced, "You have arrived." In front of them stood a small wooden cabin beside a peaceful lake. It looked old but well cared for. A wooden porch wrapped around the front. Wind chimes gently swayed in the breeze. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. Someone was home. Ethan's heart raced. "This is it." They walked to the front door. Ethan knocked gently. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Arthur slowly pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. "Hello," Ethan called. Silence. The cabin was empty. Inside, everything was neat. Bookshelves filled every wall. Maps hung beside framed photographs. A fireplace burned quietly. It felt as though someone had stepped outside only moments ago. Olivia noticed dozens of journals stacked neatly on a shelf. Each was labeled with a year. All the way to the present. Arthur looked around in amazement. "This is Samuel's handwriting." Ethan picked up a framed photograph from the mantel. It showed Samuel standing beside a young Ethan, no older than 6. Behind them was the same lake. Ethan stared in disbelief. "I've been here before." Olivia looked surprised. "You remember it?" "Only little pieces. The lake. The cabin. I thought they were dreams." Arthur smiled sadly. "They weren't dreams. They were memories." As they continued exploring, Ethan noticed a chessboard on a small table. One side of the game was complete. The other side was missing a single move. Beside it lay another handwritten note. It simply read, "Every great journey reaches a moment when someone else must make the next move." Ethan looked at the board. Without thinking, he reached forward and moved a white knight. Click. A soft mechanical sound echoed through the cabin. Everyone froze. The bookshelf beside the fireplace slowly slid open. Behind it was a hidden room. Inside the secret room stood a large wooden desk, an old computer, dozens of filing cabinets. Hundreds of photographs covered one wall. Every photograph showed someone Samuel had helped over the years. Teachers, doctors, firefighters, business owners, volunteers, students. Then Ethan noticed something. Near the center of the wall, his own photograph. It had been taken years earlier in Montana while he was helping Benjamin Lewis repair an old truck. Below it was a handwritten note. "Potential is proven by choices, not circumstances." Olivia whispered, "He's been watching you." 4 years. Arthur slowly nodded. He wasn't watching. He was believing. On the desk lay a sealed envelope. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "For Ethan Carter only." His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a letter. "Ethan, if you are standing in this room, then you have already passed every test I could create without meeting you. Character, humility, service, courage. These qualities cannot be taught. They can only be revealed. There is one final truth you deserve to know. I did not choose you because you were extraordinary. You became extraordinary because you never stopped choosing kindness when no one was watching. If you wish to know the rest of the story, come to Harrington Hall tomorrow at noon. Do not come with anger. Come with an open heart. Samuel Brooks. Arthur's face turned pale. Harrington Hall? Olivia looked confused. My family owns Harrington Hall. Arthur slowly sat down. I don't understand. He hasn't been there in nearly 20 years. Ethan looked from Arthur to Olivia. Then why would Samuel ask me to go there? No one had an answer. Miles away, inside his downtown office, Richard Harrington received a phone call. His assistant spoke urgently. Sir. They found Samuel's cabin. Richard closed his eyes. So, it has finally begun. Should we prepare security? Richard looked at an old photograph on his desk. It showed 4 young friends standing together. Samuel, Arthur, Victoria, and himself. No, this isn't a battle. He stood and walked toward the window. It's a reunion. Then, almost in a whisper, he added, and perhaps a chance to make things right. But outside the building, another car quietly pulled away. Daniel Brooks had also learned about Harrington Hall. Unlike Richard, he wasn't going there to seek answers. He was going there to destroy Ethan's future before it could truly begin. End of chapter 16. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 17. Harrington Hall. The next morning, the sky over New York was bright and clear. At exactly 11 o'clock, Ethan stood outside the massive iron gates of Harrington Hall. The estate was unlike anything he had ever seen. A long stone driveway curved through perfectly maintained gardens. Ancient oak trees lined the path. At the top of a gentle hill stood a magnificent mansion built more than a century earlier. It wasn't just beautiful. It carried history. Olivia stood beside him. I've lived here almost my whole life, she said quietly. But today, it feels like a completely different place. Arthur Bennett arrived a few moments later. So did Victoria Reynolds. None of them understood why Samuel had chosen this place. As they approached the front entrance, the heavy wooden doors slowly opened. Richard Harrington stood waiting. For the first time since Ethan had met him, Richard wasn't wearing an expensive business suit. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark trousers. He looked less like a billionaire, and more like an old man carrying a heavy memory. "Come in," he said softly. Inside, the mansion was quiet. No servants, no security guards, no assistants, only silence. Richard led them into a large library. Thousands of books covered the walls from floor to ceiling. Above the fireplace hung the same photograph Ethan had seen before. 4 young friends. Samuel Brooks, Arthur Bennett, Victoria Reynolds, Richard Harrington. They couldn't have been older than 25. Ethan looked at the picture. "You were all friends." Richard nodded. "The best of friends." Arthur smiled sadly. "We thought we were going to change the world together." Victoria looked around the room. "It's been 20 years since we were all here." Richard took a deep breath. 22. He walked to an old wooden cabinet and removed a dusty leather journal. "This is where everything began." He placed it on the table. "When we were young, the 4 of us made a promise." Arthur finished the sentence. "To use success to lift others." Victoria nodded. "We started with nothing." Richard continued. Samuel believed businesses should exist to improve communities. Arthur believed every neighborhood deserved hope. Victoria believed great leaders could be developed. "And I." He paused. "I believed wealth would give us the power to achieve those dreams." Ethan listened carefully. "So what happened?" The room became silent. Finally, Richard answered. "I forgot why I wanted success." He slowly sat down. "As my companies grew, My priorities changed. I became obsessed with winning. Every year, I earned more. But every year, I gave less. Arthur lowered his head. We argued. Victoria sighed. Many times. Richard looked toward the photograph. Samuel warned me. He said, "If money ever becomes more important than people, you'll lose both." Ethan quietly asked, "Did you listen?" Richard smiled bitterly. "No." The library fell silent. After a long pause, Richard continued, "The night we had our final meeting, Samuel left this house. He told me he was going to spend the rest of his life searching for one person." Ethan looked surprised. One person. Someone who would prove that character still mattered more than status. Richard looked directly at Ethan. "That person was you." Olivia frowned. "But Samuel met Ethan when he was a child." Richard nodded. "He did." Ethan looked confused. "How?" Richard opened another page of the journal. Inside was an old newspaper clipping. It showed a 6-year-old Ethan helping an injured dog during a county fair in Montana. The headline read, "Local boy refuses reward after saving family pet." Richard smiled faintly. Samuel happened to be traveling through Montana that week. He saw something in you. He visited your town several times after that. He never interfered with your life. He simply watched your choices. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "So, the train ticket." Richard nodded. "Samuel sent it." "The compass." "Samuel." "The suit." "Samuel." "The letters." "Samuel." Ethan sat in silence. Everything suddenly made sense. The mysterious symbol. The notes. The opportunities. None of them had been accidents. Samuel had quietly believed in him for nearly 20 years, without asking for anything in return. Suddenly, the library door opened. A butler entered carrying a small wooden box. "Sir, this arrived this morning." Richard looked surprised. There was no sender. The box was addressed to Ethan. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside was an old pocket watch. Beneath it lay a single folded page. Everyone leaned closer. Ethan slowly opened it. The message read, "If this letter has reached you, then I am no longer able to guide you from a distance. The time has come for us to finally meet. Tomorrow, sunrise, the old lighthouse at Cape Hudson. Come alone. There are things only you should hear. Samuel Brooks." The room fell completely silent. Arthur's hands shook. Victoria covered her mouth. Richard stared at the letter without blinking. After 22 years, Samuel Brooks had finally asked for a meeting. But hundreds of miles away, another man read the very same message. Daniel Brooks had secretly photographed the letter through a window before leaving Harrington Hall. He smiled as he folded the picture and slipped it into his pocket. "So, tomorrow at sunrise." He picked up his phone. "It's time." A deep voice answered. "Everything is ready." Daniel looked toward the ocean. "Ethan Carter is finally walking exactly where we want him." For the first time in the story, it was clear. Someone wasn't just jealous of Ethan. The poor wonder boy and the rich girl. Chapter 18. The Lighthouse at Sunrise. Ethan barely slept. Samuel's letter rested on the nightstand beside his bed. He kept reading the final lines. "Come alone." The words echoed in his mind. He wanted to tell Olivia. He wanted Arthur and Victoria to come with him. But Samuel had made one request. And after everything that had happened, Ethan trusted him. At 4:30 in the morning, he quietly left his apartment. The city was still asleep. Streetlights reflected on rain-soaked sidewalks. The subway was nearly empty. As the train carried him toward the coast, he looked out the window. The sun had not yet risen. A new chapter of his life was about to begin. Nearly 40 miles away, the Cape Hudson Lighthouse stood on a rocky cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The lighthouse had guided ships safely to shore for more than 100 years. The crashing waves below created a constant roar. The air smelled of salt and sea. When Ethan arrived, the eastern sky had just begun turning orange. He climbed the winding path toward the lighthouse. His heartbeat grew faster with every step. He reached the top. No one was there. Only the sound of the wind. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, he heard footsteps behind him. Ethan slowly turned. An elderly man stood a few yards away. He wore a brown coat, a gray scarf, and a weathered leather hat. His silver hair moved gently in the ocean breeze. His eyes were kind. Very kind. The man smiled. "I was beginning to think you might be late." Ethan stared at him. For a moment, he couldn't speak. "You?" The man nodded. "My name is Samuel Brooks." Neither of them moved. It felt as though time itself had stopped. Finally, Ethan walked forward. "I've spent years trying to find you." Samuel smiled. "I know." "Why?" "Because I wanted to thank you." Samuel looked surprised. "Thank me? You changed my life." Samuel shook his head gently. "No, Ethan. You changed your own life. I only opened a few doors." They sat on a wooden bench facing the ocean. For several minutes, neither man spoke. They simply watched the sunrise. Finally, Samuel broke the silence. "Do you know why I chose you?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I've wondered that for years." Samuel reached into his pocket and removed an old photograph. It showed 6-year-old Ethan kneeling beside an injured golden retriever at a county fair in Montana. The little boy was crying while gently wrapping the dog's injured paw with his own scarf. Samuel pointed to the photograph. "Do you remember this?" "A little." "The dog's owner offered your family $500. Ethan nodded slowly. "My mother refused." Samuel smiled. "Do you remember what she said?" Ethan closed his eyes. After a long pause, he whispered, "Kindness loses its meaning if we only offer it for a reward." Samuel nodded. "Exactly. I was standing nearby. I had been searching for years." "Searching for what?" "A person whose values couldn't be purchased." Samuel looked toward the ocean. "When Richard, Arthur, Victoria, and I were young, we believed success would make the world better. We were wrong." Ethan frowned. "You were." Samuel nodded. "Success doesn't improve people. It reveals who they already are." He continued, "Money revealed Richard's ambition. Responsibility revealed Arthur's compassion. Leadership revealed Victoria's wisdom. And loneliness," he smiled softly, "revealed my purpose." Ethan looked at him carefully. "So you disappeared." "I didn't disappear. I simply stepped away from public life." Samuel pointed toward the horizon. "I traveled. I volunteered. I taught. I observed. And eventually, I found you." Ethan hesitated before asking the question that had lived in his heart for years. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Samuel laughed quietly. "Because advice given too early becomes dependence. I wanted you to become strong enough to stand without me." For a while, they simply listened to the waves. Then Samuel reached into his coat. He removed a small brass key. "I've been waiting a long time to give you this." Ethan accepted it. "What does it open?" "A door." Samuel smiled. "But more importantly, a responsibility." Just then, a loud engine shattered the peaceful morning. Both men looked toward the narrow road leading to the lighthouse. A black SUV sped toward them. Another followed behind it. Samuel's smile disappeared. "They found us." "What?" "There isn't much time." The vehicles stopped abruptly. 4 men stepped out. All wore dark jackets. Their leader was Daniel Brooks. But the confident young trainee Ethan knew was gone. His expression was cold, calculated. He slowly walked toward Samuel. "So, the reunion is finally over." Ethan stepped in front of Samuel. "What do you want?" Daniel smiled. "I don't have a problem with you. My problem," he looked directly at Samuel, "is with him." Samuel quietly stood. "I wondered how long it would take." Daniel's voice hardened. "My father spent his entire life believing in your ideas. He gave away opportunities. He turned down fortunes. He always said, 'People matter more than profits.'" Daniel clenched his fists. "And do you know what he died with?" Samuel's face filled with sorrow. "No." "A mountain of regrets. And almost no money." The wind grew stronger. The waves crashed violently below the cliffs. Daniel pointed toward Ethan. "You've poisoned another generation." Samuel answered calmly. "No. I reminded them that wealth is a servant, not a master." Daniel laughed bitterly. "We'll see how noble those ideas are, when everything Ethan has built begins to collapse." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Daniel pulled a folder from his jacket and tossed it onto the ground. Inside were photographs, legal documents, financial reports. Every headline was the same. Reynolds Innovation Group under investigation. Hope Community Center funding frozen. Anonymous complaint filed against Ethan Carter. Ethan stared in disbelief. "What is this?" Daniel smiled. "Your future." The sea breeze carried the papers across the cliff. Samuel looked at Ethan. His voice remained calm. "I told you there would be one final lesson." Ethan looked up. "What lesson?" Samuel met his eyes. "When people can't defeat your character, they will attack your reputation." The words hung in the air. Ethan suddenly realized that the greatest challenge of his life was no longer about becoming successful. It was about protecting the trust he had earned. And that battle had just begun. End of Chapter 18. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 19. The Storm of Lies. The papers scattered across the cliff as the wind carried them toward the ocean. Ethan picked up one of the pages. His face turned pale. The headline read, "Leadership Trainee Accused of Misusing Community Donations." Another page claimed that Ethan had secretly used the Hope Community Center to gain publicity for his career. Every accusation was false, but they looked convincing. Each article quoted anonymous sources. Each report contained carefully edited photographs. Daniel smiled. People don't always believe the truth. They believe the story they hear first. Samuel remained calm. "I warned you years ago, Daniel." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "And I warned you that your way of thinking would fail." He turned back to Ethan. "By tomorrow morning, your name will be everywhere." Then Daniel and the others climbed back into their SUVs and drove away. Silence returned to the lighthouse. Only the waves could be heard. Ethan stared at the papers. "I've never touched a single donation." Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know. But now the world must discover that for itself. By the time Ethan returned to Manhattan, the damage had already begun. Television screens in cafes carried the breaking news. News websites displayed his photograph. Social media was flooded with speculation. Some people defended him. Others rushed to judge him. At Reynolds Innovation Group, employees whispered in the hallways, "Did you see the news? I hope it isn't true. I can't believe someone like Ethan would do that." Rumors spread faster than facts. Victoria Reynolds immediately called an emergency meeting. When Ethan arrived, she was already waiting with several senior executives. She looked directly at him. "Did you misuse any funds?" "No." "Did you accept money for personal gain?" "Never." "Did you ask anyone to create publicity for Project Hope?" "No." Victoria nodded once. "That's all I needed to hear." One executive looked surprised. "Shouldn't we conduct an internal investigation first?" Victoria answered calmly, "We will. But trust begins with believing honest people until evidence proves otherwise." She looked at Ethan. "I hired your character. I haven't seen anything that changes my decision." Ethan felt a wave of relief. "Thank you." Across town, Olivia was furious. She stormed into her father's office. "Did you know about this?" Richard looked up from his desk. "I found out this morning." "You don't believe it, do you?" Richard didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened his laptop. On the screen were dozens of financial reports. "I've already had my legal team review every donation made to the Hope Community Center. And there isn't a single missing dollar." Olivia smiled. "I knew it." Richard leaned back. "Someone spent months creating this lie." "Why?" "Because destroying a reputation is often cheaper than defeating a person." Meanwhile, Maria watched the television inside her diner. Several customers discussed Ethan. One man shook his head. "I always knew he was too good to be true." Maria walked over to his table. "You don't know him." "I'm just saying what everyone else is saying." Maria looked him straight in the eye. "I've known Ethan since the day he arrived in New York. He worked 12-hour shifts. He gave away his tips to hungry people. He cleaned this diner after everyone else went home. If you want to judge him, at least know him first." The diner fell silent. The customer quietly lowered his eyes. That evening, Ethan walked alone through Central Park. He needed time to think. As he sat on his favorite bench, someone quietly sat beside him. It was Samuel. "I thought you had left." Samuel smiled. "I promised to meet you. I never promised to disappear." Ethan sighed. "I don't know what to do." Samuel looked toward the lake. "When I was your age, I faced something similar." "What happened?" Samuel smiled. "I tried to defend myself." "Did it work?" "No." "So what did you do?" "I kept serving people." Ethan looked confused. Samuel continued, "Truth is patient. Lies are impatient. If you spend all your energy chasing every rumor, you'll stop doing the good work that created your reputation in the first place." The next morning, Ethan arrived at the Hope Community Center. To his surprise, more than 100 volunteers were already there. Frank walked over carrying a paintbrush. "We're with you." The retired teacher smiled. "We know the truth." Children ran toward Ethan. "Are we still having reading class today?" Ethan looked around. No one had left. In fact, more people had come than ever before. Arthur quietly whispered, "You see." "What?" "A good reputation isn't built in one day." And it isn't destroyed in one day either. Later that afternoon, Daniel Brooks watched the community center from inside his car. He frowned. This doesn't make sense. One of his associates asked, "What now?" Daniel slammed his hand against the steering wheel. They're supposed to abandon him. Instead, volunteers kept arriving. Donations actually increased. Parents continued bringing their children. The campaign that was meant to destroy Ethan had done the opposite. It had revealed how deeply people trusted him. Daniel looked through the windshield at Ethan, who was helping children plant flowers in the front garden. For the first time, Daniel realized something dangerous. Character was proving much harder to defeat than he had imagined. But he wasn't ready to give up. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder. This one was marked Confidential. Across the front was a single name: Sarah Carter, Ethan's mother. Daniel smiled coldly. If I can't break the sun, I'll use the person he loves most. Far away, in the quiet mountains of Montana, Sarah Carter stepped outside her little cabin with a basket of fresh bread, completely unaware that a new threat was already making its way toward her peaceful town. End of Chapter 19. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 20. Back to Pine Creek. 2 days later, Ethan was reviewing volunteer schedules at the Hope Community Center when his phone rang. The caller ID read, Benjamin Lewis. Ethan smiled as he answered, "Mr. Lewis, it's good to hear your voice." But Benjamin didn't sound like himself. "Ethan." His voice trembled. "You need to come home." Ethan's smile faded. "What happened?" Benjamin hesitated. "Someone has been asking questions about your mother." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What kind of questions?" "They've been pretending to be reporters. They've visited the grocery store, the church. They even came to my garage." Ethan stood up. "Is my mother okay?" "So far, yes. But something doesn't feel right." Benjamin lowered his voice. "I've lived in Pine Creek for 70 years. I know the difference between curiosity and someone hunting for information." Within an hour, Ethan was sitting in Victoria Reynolds' office. "I need to go to Montana." Victoria nodded immediately. "Go. What about Project Hope?" "It will still be here." "What about work?" Victoria smiled. "Family first." She handed him a plane ticket. "The company jet is leaving in 90 minutes. Ethan looked surprised. "I can't accept this." "You can. And you will." She smiled warmly. "Consider it an investment in doing the right thing." Olivia insisted on going with him. "So am I." Ethan shook his head. "It could be dangerous." She smiled. "Exactly." Arthur also volunteered. But Samuel quietly stopped him. "No." Arthur frowned. "Why?" Samuel looked toward Ethan. "This is a journey he needs to make with Olivia." Arthur understood. Some lessons couldn't be shared. They had to be lived. That evening, the small jet landed at the nearest regional airport. From there, Ethan rented an old pickup truck. As they drove through the mountains, memories flooded back. The old wooden bridge, the river where he used to fish with his father, the little general store. Everything looked exactly as he remembered. Olivia looked out the window. "It's beautiful." Ethan smiled. "It taught me everything I know." When they finally reached Pine Creek, the entire town seemed to know they had arrived. Children ran toward the truck. "Ethan's home." People stepped out of their houses. Mr. and Mrs. Harper waved from their porch. The local baker came running with a loaf of fresh bread. Even Noah, now taller and more confident than before, hurried across the street. He hugged Ethan tightly. You actually came back. I promised I would. Noah smiled. I graduate next month. Ethan grinned. I never doubted you. Olivia watched everything quietly. Nobody cared that Ethan had appeared on television. Nobody mentioned New York. To them, he was simply Ethan, the boy who had never forgotten where he came from. When Ethan opened the cabin door, his mother was kneading dough in the kitchen. She looked up. For a second, she froze. Then she smiled the same warm smile he remembered from childhood. My boy. Ethan rushed forward and hugged her. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Olivia quietly stepped back, giving them a private moment. After several minutes, Sarah finally looked at Olivia. So, this must be Olivia. Olivia looked surprised. You know my name. Sarah laughed softly. A mother knows when her son has found someone special. Olivia blushed. It's an honor to meet you. Sarah hugged her as though they had known each other for years. Welcome home. For the first time in a long while, Olivia understood why Ethan was the person he was. His kindness had a beginning, and it began in this little cabin. That night, the whole town gathered for a welcome dinner in the community hall. Long wooden tables filled the room. Everyone brought homemade food. There was laughter, music, stories. The atmosphere was warm and joyful. During dinner, Benjamin quietly pulled Ethan aside. I need to show you something. They walked to the garage. Benjamin opened a small metal drawer. Inside were photographs. The same black SUV had been seen around Pine Creek 3 different times during the past week. They were watching the cabin. Ethan's expression grew serious. Did anyone recognize them? Benjamin shook his head. No. But Noah followed one of the vehicles. What happened? It stopped at the old abandoned sawmill. Meanwhile, across town, inside the deserted sawmill, Daniel Brooks stood beside a dusty window overlooking Pine Creek. One of his men entered. They're here. Daniel smiled. Good. Is everything ready? Yes. The next phase begins tomorrow. Daniel looked toward the lights of the small town. You know why Ethan keeps winning? His associate shook his head. Because he always gets to be the hero. Daniel's smile slowly disappeared. So, tomorrow, we'll give him a choice. What kind of choice? Daniel looked toward Ethan's cabin in the distance. A choice no hero wants to make. He closed the folder in his hands. Across the cover was a single word written in bold black letters. Ultimatum. Outside, the wind swept through the pine trees. The peaceful town of Pine Creek had no idea that by sunrise, everything was about to change. End of Chapter 20. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 21 continued the ultimatum. Benjamin Lewis stepped forward. You can't threaten an entire community. Daniel barely looked at him. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm presenting a choice. Sarah Carter quietly took the document from Ethan and read it herself. When she finished, she folded the papers and handed them back. You've written this very carefully. Daniel smiled. My lawyers are excellent. Sarah looked him in the eyes. And yet, there isn't a single sentence about helping people. Daniel's smile faded. I didn't come here to debate philosophy. No, Sarah replied calmly. You came here because kindness keeps defeating your plans. The neighbors exchanged quiet glances. Daniel wasn't used to people speaking to him that way, especially not someone living in a tiny mountain cabin. Ethan stepped forward. If I agree, the community center stays open? Daniel nodded. Yes. And if I refuse? The redevelopment project moves forward. Ethan looked down at the papers. For several long moments, no one spoke. Finally, he folded the document. I need time to think. Daniel checked his watch. You have 24 hours. He turned toward the SUVs. Oh. One more thing. He looked back at Ethan. If you try to expose this deal publicly, the offer disappears. With that, Daniel climbed into his vehicle. Moments later, the 3 black SUVs disappeared down the mountain road. The town remained silent. Noah kicked a small stone across the dirt road. This isn't fair. Benjamin sighed. Life rarely is. Sarah gently placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder. What troubles you the most? Ethan answered honestly. If I fight, the community might lose everything. If I surrender, I'll lose the reason we started. Sarah smiled softly. When you were 8 years old, do you remember the old apple tree behind this cabin? Ethan laughed quietly. I climbed it even though you told me not to. And then I fell. You broke your arm. Ethan nodded. Sarah continued. Do you remember what you said while the doctor was putting on your cast? Ethan thought for a moment. Then he smiled. I said, at least I know which branch not to trust anymore. Sarah laughed. You've always looked for lessons instead of excuses. She looked directly into his eyes. So don't ask yourself, which choice hurts less? Ask yourself, which choice lets me sleep peacefully 20 years from now? Those words stayed with Ethan. That afternoon, Ethan walked alone to the river outside Pine Creek. The same river where his father had taught him to fish. He skipped a flat stone across the water. 1 bounce. 2, 3. Then it sank. Thinking too hard, Ethan turned. Samuel Brooks was standing beneath a pine tree, carrying his old walking stick. You followed me? Samuel smiled. I guessed where you'd come. They sat on an old wooden log overlooking the river. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan asked, what would you do? Samuel chuckled. If I answer that, you'll spend your life following my decisions instead of your own. Ethan sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. Samuel picked up a smooth stone and tossed it gently into the river. Do you know what leadership really is? What? Standing alone long enough for other people to find the courage to stand beside you. Back in New York, Richard Harrington was reviewing documents when his assistant rushed into the office. Sir, you need to see this. Richard looked up. What is it? The assistant placed a confidential folder on his desk. We traced the company behind the redevelopment proposal. Richard opened the file. His expression changed instantly. This can't be right. The assistant nodded. It is. The company isn't independent. It's secretly owned through a chain of shell corporations. Richard slowly looked up. Who owns them? The assistant hesitated, then quietly answered, the Brooks Capital Group. Richard frowned. But Samuel never owned an investment company. He didn't. Daniel does. Richard leaned back in disbelief. Daniel has been using his late father's company. The assistant nodded. And there's something else. What? The documents were forged. Richard stood immediately. Get the car. Where are we going? Montana. For what? Richard picked up his coat. I'm done watching from the sidelines. If Ethan is about to fight the biggest battle of his life, he shouldn't have to fight it alone. That evening, Pine Creek held an emergency town meeting. Nearly every resident filled the small community hall. Some believed Ethan should accept Daniel's offer. Others wanted him to refuse. The room became divided. Voices grew louder. Arguments broke out. For the first time since Ethan had returned home, his own community couldn't agree. Ethan quietly walked to the front of the room. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited. One by one, the conversations stopped. Every eye turned toward him. He looked at the people who had watched him grow up. His teachers, his neighbors, his friends, his family. He took a slow breath. "I've made my decision." The room became completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Ethan looked around the hall. Then he spoke 5 simple words. "I will not sign it." Gasps echoed through the room. Some looked relieved. Others looked terrified. Benjamin slowly smiled. Sarah closed her eyes with quiet pride. Olivia reached for Ethan's hand. Outside the community hall, however, someone lowered a camera after recording every second of Ethan's speech. Daniel Brooks watched the live video feed from his laptop. He didn't look angry. He smiled. "Exactly the answer I was hoping for." He closed the laptop and turned to one of his associates. "Phase 3 begins tonight." The associate frowned. "What is Phase 3? Daniel looked toward the dark Montana mountains. "We take away his greatest strength. The people who believe in him." End of chapter 21. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 22. When the town stood together. The meeting ended just after sunset. People slowly left the community hall. Some still argued quietly. Others walked home in silence, thinking about Ethan's decision. Ethan remained inside, helping stack the chairs. Olivia noticed he seemed calmer than she expected. "You don't look worried." Ethan smiled faintly. "I am." "Then why are you smiling?" "Because once you know you're doing the right thing, you stop wasting energy wondering if it's the easy thing." Olivia squeezed his hand. "I wish everyone thought like you." Ethan looked around the empty hall. "Maybe they will. One day." Across town, Daniel Brooks sat inside the abandoned sawmill with his team. A large map of Pine Creek was spread across a table. Several names had been circled. Benjamin Lewis, Pastor Williams, Mayor Collins, the Harper family. Daniel pointed to the map. "Tomorrow morning, every one of them receives the same message." One of his associates frowned. "What message?" Daniel smiled. "They'll each be offered money. A lot of money. And if they refuse..." Daniel's expression hardened. "They'll be reminded what happens when small towns lose investors." The next morning, luxury SUVs rolled through Pine Creek. Each stopped at a different house. Different representatives knocked on different doors. Every offer was almost identical. A generous donation, new roads, a modern shopping center, scholarships for local students, all in exchange for one thing: support the redevelopment project. By lunchtime, rumors filled the town. Some people were tempted. Others were suspicious. The community was once again divided. Benjamin Lewis received one of the visitors at his garage. The businessman smiled confidently. "Mr. Lewis, we're prepared to pay you $1 million for your property." Benjamin laughed. "You've got the wrong address." The businessman blinked. "Excuse me." Benjamin wiped grease from his hands. "My garage isn't for sale. We're offering far above market value." Benjamin smiled. "My father built this garage. My son learned to repair engines here. And Ethan rebuilt his first truck in that corner." He pointed toward an old workbench. "Tell your boss. Some things don't have a price." The businessman quietly left. Meanwhile, Sarah Carter was hanging laundry outside her cabin when another representative arrived. He politely introduced himself. "Mrs. Carter, we'd like to discuss an exciting investment opportunity." Sarah smiled warmly. "Would you like some fresh bread first?" The man looked confused. It's homemade. You've probably been driving all morning." Embarrassed, he accepted. They sat on the porch. For 20 minutes they spoke about family, childhood, and life. When he finally explained the offer, Sarah listened carefully. Then she gently pushed the contract back across the table. "I'm sorry. I can't help you. May I ask why?" Sarah smiled. "Because I raised my son to build communities, not sell them." The man lowered his eyes. As he stood to leave, Sarah handed him another loaf of bread. "For your trip home." He stared at it for a moment. No one has ever turned down a business proposal. "And given me lunch." Sarah laughed softly. "There's a first time for everything." By evening, something unexpected happened. Several of Daniel's own representatives returned to the sawmill. One of them spoke first. "I'm quitting." Daniel looked up sharply. "What?" Another placed his company badge on the table. "So am I." Daniel frowned. "Have you all lost your minds?" The first man shook his head. "I've worked in real estate for 15 years. I've negotiated hundreds of deals. But I've never met people like this. They're kind. They trust each other. They actually care about their neighbors." Another representative added, "I don't want to be the person who destroys that." Daniel stared at them in disbelief. "You're walking away because they were nice to you?" The man answered quietly, "No. We're walking away because they reminded us who we wanted to be before money became everything." One by one, they left. Daniel was alone. He slammed his fist against the table. "This isn't over." That same evening, Richard Harrington arrived in Pine Creek. His black sedan stopped outside Ethan's cabin. Ethan opened the door, surprised. "Mr. Harrington?" Richard smiled awkwardly. "I was hoping you'd call me Richard." Ethan invited him inside. Sarah immediately recognized him from old photographs Samuel had shown her years ago. "You've changed." Richard smiled sadly. "So have you." After dinner, everyone gathered around the fireplace. Richard stood. "I owe all of you an apology." He looked at Ethan first. "I judged you because of your bank account. I was wrong." He turned to Olivia. "I tried to choose your future instead of trusting your heart." "I'm sorry." Finally, he looked at Sarah. "You raised a son. That reminds me of the man I wanted to become." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "You still can." Those 4 simple words struck Richard harder than any criticism ever had. Late that night, Richard stepped outside. Samuel was standing beneath the stars. The 2 old friends faced each other in silence. After 22 years, they finally met again. Richard slowly walked forward. "I'm sorry." Samuel smiled gently. "I know." "No." Richard's voice cracked. "You don't understand. I chose wealth over our promise. I abandoned everything we believed." Samuel placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. "The important question isn't what you chose 20 years ago. It's what you'll choose tomorrow." Richard looked toward Ethan's cabin. For the first time in decades, he felt hope. But hidden among the trees, someone watched the reunion through a pair of binoculars. Daniel Brooks lowered them slowly. "So, the old team is together again." He picked up his phone. "It's time." The voice on the other end asked, For what? Daniel looked toward the sleeping town. For the final move. Far above Pine Creek, dark storm clouds began gathering over the mountains. A storm was coming, and it wouldn't just change the weather. It would change every life in the valley. End of chapter 22. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 23. The Flood. The air felt strangely heavy the next morning. Dark clouds covered the Montana sky. The wind that usually carried the scent of pine now carried the smell of rain. Benjamin Lewis stood outside his garage, looking toward the mountains. "This doesn't look good." An old rancher passing by nodded. "The river's rising faster than I've ever seen." Inside the cabin, Sarah was preparing breakfast. Fresh biscuits filled the kitchen with a warm, comforting aroma. Ethan sat at the table with Olivia, Samuel, Arthur, Victoria, and Richard. For the first time in over 20 years, the four old friends were together again. It should have been a joyful morning. Instead, everyone sensed that something was coming. A loud knock interrupted breakfast. Mayor Collins rushed inside, soaked from the rain. "We've got a problem." Benjamin looked up. "What happened?" "The Weather Service just upgraded the storm. They're warning of flash floods." Samuel quietly stood. "How much time do we have?" "Maybe 3 hours." Without hesitation, Ethan stood up. "We need to evacuate the lower part of town." The mayor nodded. "We've already started, but we don't have enough volunteers." Ethan looked around the room. "Then let's find some." Within minutes, trucks began moving through Pine Creek. Church bells rang continuously. Fire trucks drove slowly through the streets with loudspeakers. "Attention everyone! Move to higher ground immediately." Ethan divided the volunteers into teams. One checked on elderly residents. Another helped families pack essentials. A third moved livestock from low-lying farms. Nobody argued. Nobody complained. They simply worked. Daniel Brooks watched everything from the abandoned sawmill. His associate entered hurriedly. "The storm is getting worse." Daniel barely looked away from the window. "I know. What about our equipment near the river?" Daniel hesitated. Several expensive construction machines had already been delivered for the redevelopment project. If the flood reached them, millions of dollars would be lost. His associate asked again, "Should we move them?" Daniel looked toward the town, then toward the machines. Finally, he made his choice. "No. We move the people first." The associate blinked. "The people?" Daniel sighed. "They may hate me, but I won't let anyone die." It was the first time Ethan's influence had reached Daniel, even if Daniel didn't yet realize it. By noon, rain poured relentlessly. The river overflowed its banks. Water rushed through fields and across roads. A wooden bridge cracked under the pressure of the current. "Bridge is gone!" someone shouted over the radio. Benjamin grabbed the microphone. "Team 3 is trapped on the east side." Ethan immediately answered. "I'm going." Olivia grabbed his arm. "You can't do this alone." "I'm not." Before anyone else could volunteer, Daniel stepped forward. "I'll go." The room fell silent. Everyone stared at him. Benjamin frowned. "You?" Daniel nodded. "I know heavy equipment, and I've got the only all-terrain rescue vehicle left." Samuel quietly smiled. People noticed, but said nothing. 20 minutes later, Ethan and Daniel drove through the storm together. Neither spoke. Rain hammered against the windshield. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You should hate me." Ethan kept his eyes on the flooded road. "I don't." "Why not?" "Because hate makes bad decisions." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You really are impossible." When they reached the east side of town, they found 6 people stranded on the roof of a farmhouse. The floodwaters had surrounded the building. The current was growing stronger every minute. Daniel positioned the rescue vehicle as close as possible. The water's too deep. Ethan grabbed a safety rope. "We don't have time." Without another word, he tied the rope around his waist and stepped into the freezing water. Daniel stared at him. Then, with a frustrated sigh, he grabbed another rope. "What are you doing?" Ethan shouted. "If you drown, I'll never hear the end of it." For the first time since they met, they smiled at each other. Just a little. Working together, they rescued all 6 people. Among them was an elderly woman who could barely walk. Daniel carried her the final 100 feet himself. She gently touched his face. "Thank you, son." Daniel froze. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had thanked him with such genuine warmth. By evening, the storm finally began to weaken. No lives had been lost. Hundreds of people had reached safety. The town gathered inside the high school gymnasium, which had become an emergency shelter. Families shared blankets. Children played games to pass the time. Neighbors cooked meals together. Despite the disaster, there was hope. Mayor Collins stood before the crowd. "I've served this town for 18 years. I've never seen people work together like they did today." He smiled. "Ethan Carter, would you come forward?" The gym erupted in applause. Ethan shook his head. "It wasn't just me." He pointed toward Benjamin, then Samuel, then Richard, then Olivia. Finally, he pointed toward Daniel. None of this would have happened without him. The applause slowly shifted. People turned toward Daniel. At first, he looked uncomfortable. Then an elderly farmer walked over and shook his hand. "Thank you." Another person followed. Then another. Within minutes, the same town Daniel had tried to manipulate was thanking him. Daniel's eyes became moist. He looked down, unable to speak. Samuel quietly whispered to Richard, "Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating an enemy. It's helping them remember they were never meant to be one." Richard smiled. "I think you've been right all along." But as the people celebrated surviving the flood, a deputy sheriff entered the gym with an anxious expression. He walked quickly to Mayor Collins and whispered something in his ear. The mayor's smile disappeared. He looked toward Ethan. "Ethan, we've got another problem." "What is it?" The mayor took a slow breath. While everyone was evacuating, someone broke into the Hope Community Center in New York, and they stole every financial record. The room fell silent. Daniel looked up sharply. He knew immediately what that meant. Someone else had entered the game. And this time, it wasn't him. End of chapter 23. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl, chapter 24. The Invisible Enemy. The applause in the emergency shelter faded into silence. Ethan looked at the mayor. "Are you sure?" Mayor Collins nodded. "The New York police called just before I came in. They said the office was broken into sometime during the storm." Victoria Reynolds immediately reached for her phone. "I need to call Maria." A few moments later, Maria answered. Her voice was shaking. "It's true. I went to check on the center this morning. The front door was forced open. The computers are gone. The donation records. The accounting files. Everything." Ethan frowned. "Was anything else taken?" Maria hesitated. "No. Only documents." Samuel slowly stood. "Then this wasn't a robbery. It was preparation." Back in New York, detectives examined the crime scene. Nothing seemed random. The alarm system had been disabled. Security cameras had been disconnected. The thieves knew exactly what they wanted. One detective looked at his partner. This was professional. His partner nodded. They were inside for less than 7 minutes. Richard Harrington looked at Samuel. Daniel. Samuel slowly shook his head. No. Richard frowned. Why not? Because Daniel wants to defeat Ethan. This. Samuel looked toward the rain outside the gymnasium. Is someone trying to erase the truth? Late that night, the storm finally passed. Most families were asleep on cots inside the shelter. Ethan sat alone near the window. He couldn't stop thinking about the missing records. Olivia quietly sat beside him. You blame yourself. Ethan sighed. I left New York. You came home to protect your mother. I know. But if those documents disappear, people may believe I stole the money. Olivia looked at him. Do you? He smiled. Of course not. Then why are you borrowing other people's doubts? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. She was right. He had spent so much time worrying about what others might think, that he had forgotten what he knew. The next morning, the roads reopened. Ethan, Olivia, Richard, Victoria, Samuel, and Arthur boarded a private flight back to New York. Daniel stood alone near the runway. As Ethan approached him, Daniel held out his hand. I owe you an apology. Ethan looked at him. For what? For almost everything. Ethan smiled and shook his hand. We'll start there. Daniel nodded. I want to help. Richard looked surprised. You would. Daniel answered quietly. My father believed in Samuel. I spent years trying to prove he was wrong. He looked toward the mountains. Yesterday, I realized I was actually trying to prove my father was wrong. Samuel walked over. You don't have to spend the rest of your life correcting yesterday. You only have to choose tomorrow. Daniel smiled for the first time without bitterness. Back in New York, investigators continued searching the Hope Community Center. A young forensic officer called his supervisor. Sir, I found something. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in Ethan's office was a tiny black object. A tracking device. The supervisor took it carefully. No, it's much smaller. He looked closer. A listening device. The room fell silent. That meant someone hadn't just broken into the center. Someone had been secretly listening for weeks. At Reynolds Innovation Group, Victoria gathered the executive team. We're treating this as corporate espionage. One executive asked, who would go this far? Victoria answered honestly, I don't know, but whoever it is already knows our next move. That evening, Ethan returned to the community center. Despite the break-in, volunteers were already cleaning. Children were repainting the front fence. Parents were organizing donated books. Frank smiled as Ethan arrived. We figured you'd need some help. Ethan looked around. They didn't scare you away. Frank laughed. Son, I've lived in New York for 60 years. If broken windows scared us, this city would have disappeared long ago. Everyone laughed. Hope was still alive. As the sun set, a black luxury sedan stopped across the street. A woman stepped out. She wore a dark green coat and carried a leather briefcase. She looked to be in her early 40s. Confident. She crossed the street and introduced herself. My name is Evelyn Stone. I represent the Federal Financial Integrity Bureau. Richard quietly whispered to Samuel. This is serious. Evelyn looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Carter, we've been investigating the stolen donation records. Have you found them? She nodded slowly. We found something even more important. She opened the briefcase. Inside was a flash drive sealed in an evidence bag. This was recovered from the suspect's abandoned vehicle. Ethan frowned. What's on it? Evelyn's expression became grave. It contains financial records from an organization called... She paused. The Horizon Foundation. Samuel's face suddenly lost all color. Arthur took a step backward. Victoria whispered, "No." Richard closed his eyes. "I thought it was destroyed." Ethan looked from one face to another. "What is the Horizon Foundation?" No one answered immediately. Finally, Samuel spoke. "It was the organization that the four of us built together." He looked at the flash drive. "And someone has spent 20 years trying to bury it." The mystery had just become much bigger than Ethan. It reached back decades, into a past that none of them had ever fully revealed. End of chapter 24. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl, chapter 25. The Secret of Horizon. The room fell into complete silence. Ethan looked at Samuel. "You founded the Horizon Foundation?" Samuel nodded slowly. "Yes." Olivia looked around the room. "You all did." Arthur, Victoria, and Richard exchanged quiet glances. Finally, Richard answered, "We were 24 years old. We believed we could build businesses that would create opportunities for people who had none." Victoria smiled faintly. "We weren't interested in becoming famous. We wanted forgotten communities to have a future." Samuel added, "Horizon wasn't created to make billionaires. It was created to create leaders." Evelyn Stone placed the flash drive on the table. "The files are encrypted, but our forensic team recovered part of the database." She opened her laptop. A projector displayed hundreds of names. Scholarship recipients, small business owners, teachers, firefighters, doctors, community leaders. Thousands of lives had been touched by Horizon. Then Ethan noticed something. One name was highlighted. Ethan Carter. Age at first contact, 6. Status, Observer Program. He looked at Samuel. "I was in your records." Samuel smiled gently. "Yes, but not because you were special. You became special because of the choices you made." Arthur stepped closer. Samuel never believed in giving people success. He believed in giving them opportunities. Victoria nodded. "If they wasted them..." The program quietly moved on. Richard lowered his eyes. "But if they used those opportunities to help others?" Samuel continued investing in them. Ethan finally understood. The train ticket. Horizon. The anonymous scholarship. Horizon. The books that appeared every Christmas. Horizon. Samuel nodded. "We never solved your problems. We only made sure you had a fair chance." Evelyn cleared her throat. "There's something else." She changed the screen. A second list appeared. This one was much shorter. Only 12 names. Across the top was written, "Founders Succession List." The first 4 names were obvious. Samuel Brooks, Richard Harrington, Victoria Reynolds, Arthur Bennett. Below them were several people Ethan didn't know. Then, at the very bottom, Candidate 12, Ethan Carter. Everyone stared at the screen. Richard slowly smiled. "So that's why." Arthur looked at Samuel. "You planned this years ago." Samuel shook his head. "No. I hoped." "There's a difference." Ethan looked confused. "What does Candidate 12 mean?" Samuel walked toward the window. when Horizon was founded. We made one promise. When the time came, none of us would choose our own successor. Why? Because power chooses favorites. Character chooses responsibility. Victoria continued. So every future leader had to be chosen through years of observation, without knowing they were being evaluated. Richard laughed quietly. Samuel called it the long test. Before anyone could speak again, Evelyn's phone rang. She answered immediately. Her expression changed. When? She listened silently. I understand. She ended the call. We have a problem. Richard frowned. What now? The suspects who stole the records have disappeared. Samuel asked quietly. All of them? Evelyn nodded. Except one. Who? She looked directly at Daniel Brooks. Daniel's face turned pale. They arrested me? No. They found your car. But you're missing. The room stared at him. Daniel slowly reached into his pocket. He removed his phone. 37 missed calls. None of them from people he recognized. Then a new message appeared. You know too much now. Don't come home. Daniel looked up. I don't understand. Samuel did. The people you've been working with were never working for you. At that exact moment, hundreds of miles away, an old warehouse on the outskirts of New Jersey stood in silence. Inside, several masked men loaded boxes of Horizon documents into a furnace. One man stopped them. No, not those. He picked up a thin leather file. Across the front was written, Project Wonder. He smiled beneath his mask. This stays. Another man asked, Why? The leader answered calmly, Because Ethan Carter is far more valuable alive than dead. The room fell silent. So what do we do? The mysterious leader closed the file. We finish what Samuel started, but in our own way. Back in New York, Samuel suddenly stood up. His expression became unusually serious. I know who they're looking for. Everyone turned toward him. They're not after Horizon. They're after the person who can control its future. Richard slowly looked at Ethan. You. Samuel nodded. Horizon wasn't built on money. It was built on trust. And right now, Ethan is the only person every side still believes. Outside the community center, a black helicopter slowly passed overhead before disappearing into the evening sky. None of them noticed the tiny camera mounted beneath it. Someone was watching every movement. The game had become much larger than a dispute over a community center. Now, it was a battle over the future of an organization that had quietly changed thousands of lives. And somewhere in the shadows, someone had already begun calling Ethan by a new name. The Wonder Boy. End of chapter 25. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl chapter 26. The Wonder Boy. The next morning, newspapers across New York carried the same headline. Who is the Wonder Boy? No one knew where the name had come from. Some believed it referred to Ethan's rescue during the apartment fire. Others thought it was because he had united people from completely different backgrounds. Television commentators debated the mystery. Social media exploded with theories. But Ethan disliked the nickname. He looked at the newspaper and sighed. I'm not a wonder. I'm just trying to do the right thing. Samuel smiled. That's exactly why the name will never change you. Inside Reynolds Innovation Group, reporters crowded outside the headquarters. Camera flashes lit up the entrance. Victoria watched the live news coverage from her office. Her assistant entered. Ma'am, the media is asking for a statement. Victoria shook her head. No. What should we tell them? The truth. And what's that? That Ethan Carter is still an employee learning his job. The assistant smiled. Nothing more. Victoria looked out the window. The world is eager to create heroes. I'm more interested in helping one remain humble. Meanwhile, the Federal Financial Integrity Bureau had begun analyzing the Horizon files. Evelyn Stone gathered her investigators. We've recovered nearly 70% of the database. One investigator looked surprised. That's incredible. Evelyn nodded. But something is missing. What? The file labeled Project Wonder. Another investigator frowned. Could it have been deleted? No. It was deliberately removed. That afternoon, Ethan returned to the Hope Community Center. Children were painting murals on one wall. The building was alive with laughter. Frank walked over carrying a toolbox. Morning, Wonder Boy. Ethan laughed. Please don't start. Frank grinned. Too late. Within minutes, volunteers all over the center were calling him the same thing. Not because he was famous. Because they said he never stopped believing people could become better. Across town, Daniel Brooks sat alone in a small apartment arranged by Richard Harrington. He was no longer hiding, but he couldn't return to his old life. He stared at an old photograph of himself with his father. His father looked happy. Daniel barely remembered that version of him. A knock came at the door. Samuel entered. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally, Daniel asked, "Why are you helping me?" Samuel smiled. "Because someone once helped me." Daniel looked confused. "After everything I did?" Samuel nodded. "If kindness only belongs to good people, then it isn't kindness." Daniel lowered his head. "I don't know how to fix what I've broken." Samuel answered quietly, "You don't fix a broken bridge by standing at one end. You start laying one plank at a time." For the first time in years, Daniel cried. Not from anger, not from frustration, but from relief. Late that evening, Evelyn Stone arrived at the Hope Community Center with urgent news. "We decoded another section of Horizon." Samuel looked up. "What did you find?" Evelyn projected a scanned document onto the wall. Its title read, Project Wonder. Below it was a handwritten sentence. "Every generation needs one leader who proves that character can still defeat power." The room became silent. Ethan looked uncomfortable. "This can't be about me." Samuel smiled. "It wasn't." Everyone looked at him. "It was written 25 years ago, long before I met Ethan." Arthur stepped closer. "So Project Wonder was never about finding one specific person." Samuel nodded. "It was about preparing for the day when someone worthy finally appeared." Richard slowly walked toward the document. He noticed another page beneath it. "There's more." Evelyn enlarged the image. Near the bottom was a handwritten list. Not names. Qualities. Honesty before popularity. Service before success. Courage before comfort. Forgiveness before revenge. People before profit. Olivia smiled. "That's Ethan." Samuel looked at her. "No. Those qualities can belong to anyone." "That's the point." Suddenly, every light inside the community center went out. Darkness filled the building. Children screamed. Emergency lights flickered on. A loud buzzing sound echoed through the hallway. Evelyn reached for her flashlight. Nobody move. Outside, 3 black vans had quietly surrounded the building. Masked figures stepped out. Not with guns. but with sophisticated electronic equipment. One technician looked at his tablet. "We've shut down the power." Another nodded. "The backup network is disabled." The leader spoke into his radio. "Begin the extraction." Inside, Ethan looked toward the front entrance. He heard footsteps. Many footsteps. Samuel's expression hardened. "They're here." Richard frowned. "Who?" Samuel answered in a calm but serious voice. "The people who have been chasing Horizon for 20 years. The front doors slowly swung open. A tall man in a black overcoat entered, carrying no weapon, only a leather briefcase. He removed his gloves and smiled politely. "Good evening. My name is—" He paused. "Adrian Cross." He looked directly at Ethan. "I've come to offer you a choice." Samuel quietly whispered, "Be careful." Ethan stepped forward. "What kind of choice?" Adrian smiled. "The kind that determines who controls the future of Horizon." The room held its breath. For the first time, Ethan was face to face with the true mastermind behind everything that had happened. And unlike Daniel, Adrian Cross wasn't driven by jealousy. He was driven by a vision that could change the world, or destroy it. End of chapter 26. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 27. The Offer. The emergency lights cast long shadows across the Hope Community Center. No one moved. Children stood close to their parents. Volunteers instinctively formed a circle around them. Adrian Cross walked forward slowly, carrying only his leather briefcase. His calm expression unsettled everyone more than anger would have. He stopped a few feet from Ethan. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance." Ethan kept his voice steady. "You shut off the power." "Yes." "You surrounded the building." "Also yes." "And you expect us to believe you came peacefully?" Adrian smiled. "I came without weapons." Samuel answered quietly. "Some of the most dangerous people in history never carried one." Adrian inclined his head respectfully. "Mr. Brooks, it's been a long time." Samuel's expression remained unchanged. "Not long enough." Adrian laughed softly. "I expected that answer." He placed the briefcase on a nearby table and opened it. Inside were neatly organized folders, maps, financial reports, and a single crystal flash drive. "I didn't come to steal Horizon. I came to save it." Richard stepped forward. "By breaking into our community center?" Adrian looked at him. "If I hadn't removed those files, someone else would have destroyed them." Evelyn frowned. "You're asking us to believe you're the hero?" "No. I'm asking you to verify the facts." He slid the flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is there." Evelyn plugged the drive into her secure laptop. Within seconds, encrypted documents appeared. Her eyes widened. "These are authentic." Victoria leaned closer. "What is it?" "Financial records. Complete audit trails. Hidden transfers." She kept scrolling. Then she froze. "Oh." Richard frowned. "What?" Evelyn turned the screen toward everyone. For nearly 15 years, someone had secretly been siphoning money away from organizations connected to Horizon. Small amounts. Just enough to avoid attention. Millions of dollars in total. Arthur whispered. "We never saw this." Adrian nodded. "Because the theft was designed to be invisible." Daniel stared at the screen. "Who did it?" Adrian looked directly at Samuel. "You trusted too many people." Samuel sighed. "I know." "No, you don't." Adrian clicked another file. A network diagram appeared. More than 30 shell companies, fake charities, false consulting firms, every one of them connected. At the center of the diagram was a single symbol, the same mysterious symbol Samuel had used in his letters, but inverted. Samuel's face grew serious. They copied it. Adrian nodded. They've been pretending to be Horizon for almost 2 decades. Ethan looked at Adrian. If you know all this, why didn't you go to the authorities? Adrian smiled sadly. I did. No one believed me. So you decided to break into the community center? I decided to recover evidence before it disappeared forever. Evelyn examined the timestamps. He may be telling the truth. Richard looked unconvinced. Or he's manipulating us. Adrian nodded. A reasonable concern. Samuel walked toward Adrian. I have one question. Adrian folded his hands. I'm listening. Why are you really here? For the first time, Adrian's confident expression faded. He looked directly at Ethan. Because they're coming. Silence filled the room. Ethan frowned. Who? Adrian answered quietly. The people neither of us has been able to stop. He pressed another key. A world map appeared. Red dots lit up across dozens of countries. Community organizations. Scholarship programs. Leadership academies. All carrying names that sounded trustworthy. But they weren't. They've spent 20 years building influence. They recruit young leaders. They buy politicians. They manipulate charities. They control information. Victoria whispered, How large are they? Adrian answered without emotion. Larger than any of us imagined. Ethan crossed his arms. What do they want? Adrian looked him in the eye. Horizon. Why? Because Horizon is the only organization they couldn't infiltrate completely. Samuel quietly added, Not because of our security. Everyone looked at him. Because Horizon was built on relationships. Not algorithms. Not contracts. Trust. Adrian closed the laptop. I'll be honest. I don't agree with all of Samuel's methods. Samuel smiled slightly. I know. I think you're too optimistic. And I think you've become too cynical. Adrian almost smiled. Probably. Then he turned back to Ethan. But we agree on one thing. What? You are the only person who can unite everyone still protecting Horizon. Ethan shook his head. I'm not qualified. Richard laughed quietly. I said exactly those words when I was your age. Arthur smiled. So did I. Victoria nodded. We all did. Samuel looked at Ethan. The people most eager for power are usually the least suited to hold it. Before Ethan could respond, every phone in the room vibrated at the same time. One message, sent simultaneously to everyone. Evelyn opened hers. Her expression changed instantly. What is it? Ethan asked. She turned the screen around. A live video feed filled the display. It showed a man tied to a chair inside a dimly lit warehouse. Bruised. Exhausted. But alive. Ethan's eyes widened. Benjamin. His old mentor looked up at the camera. A distorted electronic voice spoke. You have 24 hours. Hand over every remaining Horizon file. Or Benjamin Lewis dies. The video ended. The room fell into stunned silence. Sarah covered her mouth. Olivia grabbed Ethan's hand. Samuel slowly closed his eyes. They've crossed a line. Adrian looked at Ethan. This is why I came. Outside, thunder rolled across the New York skyline. The battle was no longer about reputation. It was no longer about money. It had become deeply personal. And Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter the cost, he was bringing Benjamin home. End of chapter 27. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 28. No one gets left behind. The video ended. No one spoke. Benjamin Lewis's tired face remained frozen in Ethan's mind. The man who had taught him how to rebuild an engine. The man who had given him his first job. The man who had treated him like a son. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. "We're going to get him back." His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the determination behind it. Evelyn Stone was the first to respond. "We need to notify the FBI immediately." Richard nodded. "They'll have hostage negotiators. They'll track the signal. They'll coordinate a rescue." Samuel looked at Ethan. "What do you think?" Everyone turned toward him. Ethan took a slow breath. "We call them, but we don't wait." Evelyn frowned. "That could be dangerous." "It is. But every hour we lose gives them time to move Benjamin." Adrian studied Ethan carefully. For the first time, he smiled with genuine respect. "You really do think differently." Within an hour, the conference room at Reynolds Innovation Group had become a command center. Maps covered the walls. Laptop screens displayed satellite images. Investigators analyzed every frame of the hostage video. One technician enlarged the background. "I found something." Everyone gathered around. Behind Benjamin's chair was a faded company logo painted on a concrete wall. Only part of it was visible. Urson Shipping. Richard immediately recognized it. Anderson Shipping. Arthur looked surprised. "That company closed years ago." Richard nodded. Their largest warehouse was abandoned on the New Jersey waterfront. Evelyn marked the location on the map. "It's our best lead." Daniel Brooks quietly stepped forward. "I know that warehouse." Every eye turned toward him. "My father used to inspect the docks nearby." He pointed to the map. "There are 3 entrances. The front loading bay, a maintenance tunnel, and an old rail access beneath the building." Evelyn wrote everything down. "This helps." Daniel looked at Ethan. "I owe Benjamin my apology too." Ethan nodded. "Then help us bring him home." Meanwhile, inside the abandoned warehouse, Benjamin Lewis sat tied to a steel chair. His hands were bound, but his spirit wasn't. A masked guard placed a bottle of water beside him. Benjamin smiled. "Thank you." The guard looked confused. "You don't hate us." Benjamin chuckled. "Hate is heavy. I'm too old to carry it." The young guard looked away. For a brief moment, he remembered his own grandfather. In another room, Adrian Cross studied architectural blueprints of the warehouse. Samuel entered quietly. "I didn't expect to see those again." Adrian didn't look up. "I kept them." Samuel smiled. "You always kept everything." Adrian finally looked at him. "You still trust Ethan completely?" Samuel answered without hesitation. "Yes." "What if that trust gets him killed?" Samuel's expression became thoughtful. "Courage isn't the absence of danger. It's choosing love despite it." Adrian sighed. "I've spent 20 years preparing for this, and I still don't know if we're ready." Samuel looked toward the map. "No one ever is." By sunset, the rescue plan was complete. Evelyn divided everyone into teams. The FBI tactical unit would secure the perimeter. Local police would block escape routes. Medical teams would wait nearby. Ethan looked around the room. "I have one request." Evelyn nodded. What is it? If we can avoid violence. We do. One agent looked surprised. They kidnapped your mentor. I know. But someone convinced them this was the right path. He paused. I'd rather change minds than collect enemies. Samuel smiled quietly. Richard whispered to Victoria. That's exactly what Horizon was built for. At midnight, the convoy left for New Jersey. Rain had begun falling again. The abandoned docks were hidden beneath thick fog. Floodlights from distant cargo ships reflected off the dark water. The old Anderson shipping warehouse stood alone. Silent. Forgotten. Ethan stepped out of the vehicle. He looked at the building. This is where he is. Daniel nodded. I'm sure. Evelyn adjusted her radio. All teams in position. The FBI commander gave the final signal. Move. Inside the warehouse, a lookout suddenly noticed movement through a broken window. He reached for his radio. We've got company. The message echoed through the building. Within seconds, every light turned on. Metal doors slammed shut. Heavy locks engaged automatically. Adrian frowned. That's impossible. Daniel looked shocked. There wasn't an automated security system. Richard slowly realized the truth. Someone upgraded this place. Samuel whispered. They were expecting us. Then, a calm voice echoed through hidden speakers. Good evening, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Harrington. Mr. Bennett. Ms. Reynolds. And... The voice paused. Mr. Ethan Carter. You've arrived exactly on schedule. A large screen flickered to life above the warehouse floor. A shadowed figure appeared. His face remained hidden. Only his voice could be heard. I've been looking forward to meeting the famous Wonder Boy. Ethan stepped forward. Who are you? The figure laughed softly. You've spent your whole life searching for answers. So let me give you one. He leaned closer to the camera. I wasn't trying to destroy Horizon. I created the version that replaced it. The room fell silent. Samuel's face went pale. No. The figure smiled. Oh yes. And tomorrow, the world will finally learn which vision deserves to survive. The screen went black. A loud mechanical sound echoed beneath the floor. Daniel looked down. His eyes widened. There are explosives. They've rigged the building. The countdown clock on the wall lit up. 29:59. 29 minutes. 59 seconds. Ethan looked at the timer. Then at the warehouse. Benjamin was still inside. So were dozens of innocent dock workers who had been secretly held in another section of the building. The rescue mission had suddenly become a race against time. End of Chapter 28. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl. Chapter 29. 29 minutes. The red countdown clock glowed through the darkness. 29:58. 29:57. Every second echoed inside the warehouse. FBI agents instinctively reached for their radios. Evelyn Stone immediately took control. Nobody panic. Bomb squad, move in. Medical teams, stand by. The tactical teams spread across the building. Engineers searched for the explosive devices. The atmosphere became tense. But Ethan remained surprisingly calm. He looked around the warehouse. Then he looked up at the steel beams supporting the ceiling. Something didn't feel right. Daniel hurried over. Ethan. What? I helped renovate part of this building years ago. There are emergency tunnels underneath. Ethan looked interested. Could they still be open? Daniel nodded. If no one sealed them. Samuel stepped closer. They'll expect us to use the main entrance. Richard immediately understood. So we go underground. Meanwhile, Benjamin Lewis could hear footsteps outside the room where he was tied. The young guard who had given him water returned. His hands were shaking. Benjamin smiled gently. You look frightened. I am. Why? They never told us there would be bombs. Benjamin studied the young man carefully. How old are you? 23. Benjamin nodded. My grandson would be about your age. The young guard looked away. I never wanted anyone to die. Benjamin spoke softly. Then help save them. The young man's breathing became heavier. For the first time, he began questioning everything he had been told. Outside, Adrian Cross unfolded the old blueprints. There. He pointed toward a faded passage beneath the warehouse. The maintenance tunnel. Daniel nodded. It leads almost directly beneath the storage rooms. Evelyn frowned. It's narrow. Only a few people can fit. Samuel looked toward Ethan. You, Daniel, and Adrian. Richard stepped forward. I'm coming too. Samuel shook his head. No. Richard frowned. Why? Because someone has to lead everyone outside if we fail. Richard didn't argue. He simply nodded. Sometimes leadership meant staying behind. The four men entered the tunnel. It was dark, cold. Water dripped steadily from rusted pipes overhead. The air smelled of salt and old concrete. They moved quietly. Flashlights barely illuminated the narrow passage. Halfway through, Daniel suddenly stopped. Listen. Everyone froze. Faint voices echoed ahead. Guards. Adrian whispered. They're directly above us. Ethan looked at the ceiling. A metal hatch. Very old. Very weak. He smiled. I've got an idea. Using an old hydraulic jack lying nearby, Daniel slowly pushed against the hatch. It lifted just enough. The guards above never noticed. One by one, Ethan, Daniel, and Adrian climbed into the storage room. Two guards stood only a few yards away. Before they could react, Ethan calmly raised his hands. We don't want to fight. One guard reached for his weapon. The younger guard stopped him. Wait. It was the same young man who had spoken with Benjamin. He looked at Ethan. Are you really the Wonder Boy? Ethan smiled awkwardly. I prefer Ethan. The young guard lowered his weapon. My grandfather always said, a person's eyes tell the truth. He looked directly at Ethan. I don't think you're lying. The second guard hesitated, then slowly lowered his weapon as well. Without a single punch, two more lives changed. They hurried toward Benjamin's room. When Benjamin saw Ethan, he laughed. I was wondering what took you so long. Ethan smiled as he untied the ropes. You always did have terrible timing. Benjamin stretched his arms. I suppose we're leaving now? Daniel looked at the timer mounted on the wall. 12:41. His smile disappeared. We've got another problem. Deep inside the warehouse, the bomb squad discovered the main explosive device. But it wasn't connected to ordinary wires. Instead, it was linked to a biometric lock. One technician looked shocked. I've never seen anything like this. The FBI commander frowned. Can you disable it? Not without the owner's authorization. Evelyn looked toward Adrian. Who designed systems like this? Adrian answered quietly. I did. Everyone stared at him. He looked ashamed. Years ago. For Horizon. So no outsider could tamper with critical facilities. Samuel sighed. Technology isn't good or evil. It depends on whose hands it serves. Adrian examined the control panel. His face became serious. I can stop it. Richard smiled with relief. Good. Adrian shook his head. But only from inside the blast chamber. The room fell silent. What happens after you stop it? Ethan asked. Adrian didn't answer. Samuel already knew. There won't be enough time to get out. Adrian looked at Ethan. I've spent years trying to correct my mistakes. Perhaps. This is how I finish. Ethan stepped in front of him. No. Adrian smiled sadly. You still think everyone deserves another chance? I do. Even me. Especially you. Those words struck Adrian harder than anything else. For years, he had believed redemption had to be earned through sacrifice. Ethan believed it began with forgiveness. Suddenly, the young guard who had surrendered earlier spoke up. I know another way. Everyone turned toward him. My father installed the emergency shutdown system. It has a manual release. Where? He pointed toward an old elevator shaft. It's dangerous. The shaft flooded years ago. Daniel looked at the clock. 8:17. 8 minutes remained. There was no time to debate. Ethan looked around the room. We go together. No one objected, because by now everyone understood something about Ethan Carter. He never asked others to face a danger that he wasn't willing to face first. As they disappeared toward the flooded elevator shaft, the mysterious mastermind watched everything through a hidden camera. For the first time, he wasn't smiling. Instead, he whispered to himself, So this is why Samuel chose him. And for the first time in many years, the mastermind began to doubt whether his own plan could succeed. End of chapter 29. The Poor Wonder Boy and the Rich Girl chapter 30. The choice that changed everything. The countdown continued. 8:16. 8:15. Water dripped steadily into the abandoned elevator shaft. The concrete walls were cracked with age. Rust covered the steel cables that had once carried freight between floors. The air smelled of oil, salt, and damp metal. The young guard took a flashlight from his belt. My name is Caleb, he said quietly. Ethan smiled. It's good to meet you, Caleb. Daniel looked at him in surprise. We're in the middle of a bomb threat, and you're introducing yourselves? Ethan shrugged. Everyone deserves to be known by their name. For a brief moment, even Daniel smiled. Caleb pointed toward a narrow maintenance ladder. The emergency release is below us. About 60 feet. Adrian looked down into the darkness. If the lower chamber is flooded, we'll have only one chance. Ethan nodded. Then let's not waste it. One by one, they climbed down. Back upstairs, Evelyn coordinated the evacuation. The FBI escorted dozens of workers and hostages outside. Richard stayed behind, refusing to leave the command post. Victoria approached him. You should go. Richard shook his head. I'm not leaving until Ethan comes out. Samuel quietly stood beside him. Neither am I. Arthur smiled. Looks like none of us are. The four old friends, who had once dreamed of changing the world together, now waited for the young man who had reminded them why they had started. Deep below the warehouse, the group reached the flooded maintenance room. Water covered the floor up to their knees. Caleb shined his flashlight across the far wall. There. A large steel wheel was mounted beside an old electrical panel. Above it were faded words. Emergency mechanical override. Adrian examined it. It isn't connected to electricity. Good. That means it can still work. Daniel grabbed the wheel. It won't move. Ethan joined him. So will I. Caleb stepped forward. "Me too." The four of them pushed together. At first, nothing happened. Then, a loud metallic groan echoed through the chamber. The wheel began to turn. Above them, the countdown suddenly paused. 3:42. The bomb technician looked up. "It's responding," Evelyn shouted into her radio. "They're doing it." Everyone outside held their breath. Underground, the wheel became harder to turn. The gears hadn't moved in years. Water rushed through broken pipes. The room trembled. Daniel gritted his teeth. "I can't hold it much longer." Ethan planted his feet firmly. "You won't have to. Together." Samuel's words echoed in his mind. Leadership means standing long enough for others to stand beside you. Ethan looked around. "We all push on 3. 1, 2, 3. With one final effort, the wheel completed its rotation. A massive steel lock disengaged somewhere deep inside the warehouse. The timer above suddenly flashed. "System override accepted." Then, midnight. The countdown disappeared. Silence. No explosion. No collapsing walls. Only silence. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then cheers erupted outside the warehouse. The bomb squad removed their helmets. Some agents hugged each other. Richard closed his eyes in relief. Victoria wiped away tears. Arthur laughed for the first time in days. Samuel simply whispered, "Thank you." As Ethan and the others climbed back to the surface, flashing police lights illuminated the dockyard. The rescued workers applauded as they emerged. Benjamin was the first to embrace Ethan. "You've always been stubborn." Ethan laughed. "I learned from you." Benjamin smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." Suddenly, FBI agents rushed toward the control room. "Evelyn, we found something." She hurried inside. Every security monitor in the warehouse had been recording continuously. One screen showed the masked mastermind leaving only minutes before the raid. But as he stepped into the rain, he removed his mask. The room fell silent. Richard leaned closer to the screen. "No." Victoria gasped. "It can't be." Samuel's face grew pale. Ethan looked from one person to another. "Who is he?" Samuel answered in a quiet voice. "His name is Nathan Hale." Arthur stared at the screen in disbelief. "He was the 5th founder of Horizon." Richard slowly nodded. "We thought he died 20 years ago." The image froze on Nathan's face. He wasn't dead. He had spent 2 decades hidden in the shadows, building a rival organization while the world believed he no longer existed. On the monitor, Nathan looked directly into the camera, as if he knew they would eventually watch the recording. He smiled and spoke just one sentence. "The first test is over. Now, Ethan Carter, let's see if you can save a nation." The screen went black. Outside, dawn was beginning to break over the harbor. The hostage crisis was over. Benjamin was safe. The bombs had been stopped. But everyone in the room understood one thing. Everything that had happened until now had only been the beginning. End of chapter 30.